Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight we step past the rusted gates into forgotten graveyards where silence isn't empty. It listens. These are 6 of the creepiest true stories from mysterious graveyards. Shadows that move without bodies, voices that whisper names they shouldn't know, and footsteps that follow when no one is there. This is a brand new channel, and my goal is 1,000 subscribers this month. But here's the strange part. Almost 90% of people who watch never subscribe. They just disappear into the dark. Don't be one of them. Hit that button now, because in this place, once you leave, you might not come back. Kill the lights. Mute the world. Let's begin. I am not from Huntsville. I didn't grow up under those red brick prison walls or the pine shadows that make even noon feel like it's thinking about dusk. I moved through that town twice a week for work, one of those forgettable jobs that keeps the lights on and the car insured. I was 28, driving a white Tacoma with a cracked windshield, doing deliveries to a uniform supplier that stocked the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. If that sounds shady, it wasn't. Boxes of boots, belts, and gloves. Sometimes mops and institutional soap that smelled like fake citrus. Drop-offs were in a squat building off Highway 75, a place that looked like a dentist office from the 70s. I'd sign for the order, drag the dolly back to the truck, and point myself toward I-45 again. The prison museum with the old electric chair sat a few blocks away, and the red brick walls unit reared up behind the trees like a courthouse that had decided to become a fortress. There was a cemetery I kept hearing about. People called it Peckerwood Hill, but the sign said Captain Joe Bird Cemetery. That felt like the cleaned-up name somebody decided on after years of looking the other way. I didn't go looking for the cemetery because of ghost stories. It was a practical errand that first night. My friend Luis had left his phone in my truck after helping me unload at the supplier. He lived in Spring but was staying with his cousin in Huntsville while his apartment was being fumigated, and he asked if I could swing by after my last route. "I owe you barbecue," he said. "There's a place near the square that does brisket right." We met at a corner lot where the lights hummed and bugs suicided into the bulbs. He got his phone, paid for my gas, and then said, like it was an afterthought, "You want to see the convict graveyard? It's 10 minutes west. I promise it isn't as sketchy as it sounds." If you know Huntsville, you know pine stands and the way the highway shoulders glitter with broken glass that never quite goes away. You know a humidity that feels like someone left a wet towel over your face. We drove west on 190, past storefront churches and shuttered feed stores, past a vape shop doing Friday night business and a fireworks stand that looked abandoned until you noticed the string lights glowing in a single corner, like a colony of fireflies had decided to squat there. The sky was the color of tea. The kind of summer night where even the frogs sound tired. "Why do they call it that?" I asked. "Peckerwood Hill." Louis shrugged. "Old word for poor white country guys. Some guard probably made it up 100 years ago. They bury the ones no one claims. Lots of crosses say unknown, some have only numbers." "I've heard lantern stories," I said. Not because I believed them, but because I wanted to hear what he'd say. My ex, Mara, used to tease me about how I pretended to be above folk tales while keeping every weird detail like a squirrel hiding away acorns. "Everybody in town has heard lantern stories," he said. "Most are just folks seeing headlights through trees, or guards doing a sweep. But my cousin works maintenance at the walls, and he swears the cemetery does things. He won't drive past it after midnight." We crested a small rise and the pines opened on our right, and there it was. The cemetery didn't announce itself with angels or stone walls. It looked like a field someone had shaved down to the scalp. The crosses were simple white slats, some tilted, some new, a geometry of grief that didn't care if you recognized it. The gate was a basic chain link with a city sign. We pulled onto the caliche shoulder. A warm wind shivered through the pine crowns, and something in the smell of it felt institutional, like soap and cut grass and electricity. I caught myself, rubbing my palms on my jeans the way I do when there's a test coming and I haven't studied. "We keep our distance," Louis said. "The fence is there for a reason. We're just looking." We got out, the truck's dome light yawning on and then off as the door shut. The dark had that thin, gray quality you get near towns where the Sky never goes honest black because there's always one more strip mall a few miles off. Cricket stitched a rough sound. Past the fence, something creaked. I told myself fences creak because they're fences, because wind exists. A dog barked once in the distance and gave up. We stood there like two kids who had walked farther than they meant to and are waiting to decide who says they want to turn back first. It didn't feel disrespectful, not exactly. It felt like standing in line behind a lot of men and not knowing what the line was for. There, Louis said, touching my elbow. Between those 3 crosses, do you see that? At first I thought he meant a person. The mind wants shoulders and a head because that means you can estimate intentions. This wasn't a person. It was a small bead of light hanging a few feet off the ground. Orange, the color of a candle protected by a cupped hand. It bobbed once, as if in greeting, and moved sideways. Another one winked into existence 20 yards away and drifted nearer. The hair along my forearms tightened, gooseflesh in the heat. I felt a kid version of myself step forward inside me, the part that wants to test every rule, and I started down the shoulder toward the gate. "Don't be stupid," Louis said, but he walked with me. We stopped where the fence met a weed-choked ditch. The lights were clearer from there and not headlights, not reflections. I've seen fireflies in East Texas. These weren't that. They had weight, like each one was a little glass bulb, and they moved as if a hand guided them from inside the dark. One drifted toward the fence and stopped. I could see the shape of the cross behind it. I could see a number carved into the marker. The number told me a man had been a man at some point, had been enough to have a number, not enough to have a name. For a second, I said, not sure I meant to say it out loud. It looks like someone holding a light just out of sight, and if they step 1 foot closer, you'll see their face. That's the trick, Louis said, and his voice was quiet in a way I had never heard it. You wait for them to show you something, then you can't pretend you didn't see it. The orange went thin, like someone pinched a wick. The second light dipped low, brushed a patch of grass, and rose again. I smelled something sharp and clean, the citrus soap from the uniform supplier. It came in on the breeze and stayed as the wind died, which meant it hadn't come from the wind. I took a step closer to the fence out of habit, to get a better view, and my left boot slipped. I looked down. My heel had skidded over a flattened circle in the dirt, a patch as round and smooth as a dinner plate. The rest of the ground was rutted and pocked by rain, but this one spot had been pressed hard by something heavy or repeated. They do funerals at night sometimes, Louis said, especially back when families didn't claim the bodies. There were years they had more than they could handle. My cousin says there used to be lanterns, real ones. People got used to that glow out here. Maybe it stuck. He said it like a dare and like he believed it both at once. I leaned 2 fingers on the chain link. The metal felt colder than it had any right to be. 30 yards in, a cross had a little white plastic flower bouquet zip-tied to it, the kind you buy at Walmart for graves that are not visited but should be. Between that cross and the next, the light we'd first seen lifted and drifted like something was testing how far it could go before whatever held it pulled back. Then, I saw it and I felt my mouth go dry and wet at the same time. There was a man under the light. Don't picture a full body with details and a face. It was the outline of a man, like heat bending air above asphalt. The lantern hung at the level of his chin. The figure was thinner than it should have been, or maybe stretched. He turned. The light showed me the shape of a jaw and a scar that wasn't a scar but a gap in the light where a mouth should have been. For a heartbeat, the orange slipped down and touched a bare chest, and I saw a tattoo there. A thin jailhouse ink of something winged. Then the light snapped small as a match dying, and I was listening to my own heartbeat do a stupid drum solo in my ears. Luis swore softly in Spanish, and then in English, and his voice did the same crack a kid's voice does when he's learning to shave. We took a step back together like we were crossing a street without talking about it. Somewhere behind the pines, a car hissed along 190. I felt the stupid part of me say, "Go get a better look." I felt the older part that pays bills say, "Stay behind the fence," like the damn sign tells you. We didn't run. That's the truth I keep telling people because it matters to me for reasons I can't defend. We walked to the truck, opened the doors, got in, and sat there with the windows down. The 2 of us listening for a knock on the roof or a laugh that didn't belong to anyone we knew. Nothing else happened. It would have been almost banal if my hands hadn't been shaking. I put the truck in gear, turned back toward Huntsville, and tried not to use the rear-view mirror. That mirror, in case you were curious, is where the orange lights look most at home. We told the story the way men who aren't good at talking tell stories. Over food. Luis bought me a brisket plate at a place that looked like it should have gone out of business a year ago, and tasted like it had no intention of dying. We ate, in a booth with a wobble, and let the air conditioning do its best. We left out the part about the tattoo. We told each other we had seen something that could be explained. We said it like a password that would let us leave the topic behind. 2 days later, Mara called me from Dallas. She heard the story from a friend who heard it from Luis's cousin, who added a few turns to make it sound bigger. Mara's laugh was fond and a little mocking. "You went to a prison graveyard at midnight," she said. "Of course you saw something. Your brain is a projector. It put a ghost right where you were expecting one." "Projection doesn't make the air smell like soap," I said, surprised that my mouth felt protective over that detail. "And it doesn't make a light move like it has weight." "Bring me next time," she said. "I'll be the boring scientist who ruins it for you." I didn't bring her. I didn't want the thing to go away. That's my best guess at myself. Some part of me had been softened by roots and receipts and the steady, small ache of a life that is working, but not wonderful. The cemetery put a finger on that spot and pressed. I went back a week later alone. It wasn't midnight. It wasn't even fully dark. The sky was violet and the mosquitoes were making their unwinnable war on my calves. I brought a decent flashlight, the kind you can use to find a fallen spark plug in tall grass, and a cheap glass lantern from the truck bed, because I wanted to see a normal light at a normal height. Something to carry in my hand and say, "This is all we saw. This is all we will ever see." I parked in the same place and walked along the fence until I found the flattened circle in the dirt again. It was still there. I told myself mowers do that, or guards, or the weight of a man standing too long in one spot, because grief does that to you. I didn't cross. I don't need you to believe my good decisions, but I made one. I stood at the fence and waited. The sky darkened. A single car passed. A moth bumped my ear and I jumped like an idiot. When the orange came, it came with no fanfare. 1 second, nothing. The next, a bead in the air, simmering. It moved toward the same numbered cross as if it had a route it had taken every night for years and would take long after I forgot my own name. "Okay," I said out loud. It sounded like the voice you use to greet a dog you don't know. "Okay." The lantern drifted lower. I could see blades of grass against it. Then I saw the second light off to my left, and I tensed because I hadn't given the story in my headroom for 2. The second light rose from behind a newer marker that said unknown, and then a number. It hung chest high, a good 10 feet inside the fence. I turned to track it, and that was when a third light winked into being behind me. Not in the cemetery, but in the reflection on the truck's rear window. Fight and flight both went dumb for a half second. I thought someone had lit a candle in my truck bed. I took 2 steps toward the truck, and the reflection moved with me, but the source didn't exist. It was only there in the glass. The orange bead hovered shoulder level in a place the world said was empty. It slid along the window as I moved, like a hand inside a mirror keeping pace. "Don't run," someone said softly. And I spun. There was a man standing 6 feet to my right in the ditch, hands in his pockets like we were 2 neighbors about to talk about a fence line. He was older, thin, wearing a Huntsville cap, and a button-down shirt ironed until the collar could cut. He didn't have a uniform, but he wore authority like a jacket no one else was strong enough to carry. "Earl," he said, and stuck out a hand. "I do ground maintenance sometimes, not out here, mostly around the units. I stop by. Make sure kids are staying on the right side of the fence." "I'm not crossing," I said. It came out a little defensive, like I'd already been accused. "I see that," he said. "I appreciate it. The dead got enough trouble without the living stepping on them." He looked past me into the cemetery and lifted his chin like he was saying hello to a neighbor who'd been there longer than either of us. "You been out before?" "Once," I said. "With a friend. We saw the lights." Earl's eyes had that watery shine that old men's eyes have when they are a little tired of the world and a little fond of it anyway. They come and go. They'll do what they want either way. Sometimes they keep folks away. Sometimes they bring them. You can't tell a story where the ending stays put. What are they? I asked. I mean, what do people think they are when they try to be serious about it? He thought, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he had too many. I started in the 70s, he said finally. Back then, if a man wasn't claimed, we did what we had to. Sometimes that meant late nights. We used real lanterns out here before the city ran better power. You get used to an orange glow over the ground. You get used to the shape of grief moving in a certain way. The mind keeps it when the lanterns go away. That's what I tell myself. Then I smell the soap. You smell it yet? I nodded. That's harder to explain, he said. Old habits come out here to die slow. Men kept things with them. Cards, letters. Once or twice something small and mean that could cut. They buried pieces of their life in their pockets. I've dug up what the ground didn't want to keep. I've put back what I could. Sometimes the lights come up when there's something the dead want found. He said it without a grin. Without the self-satisfied look people get when they've hooked you. He was a man telling me the password and warning me at the same time not to try the door. I was grateful and a little angry. He could have said it was swamp gas. He could have said I should go home. Instead, he had given the lights a job to do. Look, there, Earl said, not pointing, just nodding toward a row farther in. The one with the plastic flowers. You see how it keeps going back to that one. Sometimes that means there's something. You want to test the idea, bring gloves. Don't do it with your bare hands, don't do it at night. I'm not digging, I said, and meant it the way a man means he will eat healthier next week. I meant it in the present tense and understood the future didn't care. He tipped his cap. Take your trash with you when you leave, he said. That's always what gets to them the most. When he walked away, I realized I hadn't heard an engine and I hadn't seen headlights and I hadn't heard his feet in the grass. None of that means anything. It was a hot night, and the crickets did what they do, and my brain does what brains do. I turned off the cheap lantern, left the flashlight on, and took a slow lap along the fence. Twice the lights moved like dogs checking me out and losing interest. Once they didn't move at all, and I had the strong sense of a house full of people, holding their breath. When I left, sweat had glued my shirt to my spine, and I drove the speed limit all the way to the highway without looking in the rear view. You know what happened next. Of course I went back. The story would not be a story if I had not gone back and done the thing I said I wouldn't. I did what Earl told me not to do. I went at noon 3 days later. The sun beat down so hard the air had edges. I brought a pair of work gloves from the truck and a small trowel the color of candy. I told myself I was doing this because I wanted to prove there was nothing. I told myself I was being respectful. I told myself I would stop the second it felt wrong. I parked in the same spot and walked in through the unlocked gate because it was unlocked and because I had decided that was permission. The gravel under my boots sounded too loud, like I was breaking a rule everyone here knew and no one would write down. The cross with the flowers wasn't hard to find. The flowers were plastic roses turned chalky by sun. The cross had a number, no name. I stood there and it felt like standing at the edge of a pool and deciding you could still say you swam if you only put your feet in. I knelt, put on the gloves and brushed aside grass. The dirt was tight with clay. Dust puffed when I pressed. I dug along the base of the cross, shallow, the way you do when you're trying to find a lost coin in a carpet without committing to moving furniture. The trowel clicked against something that wasn't rock. Metal. Small. I stopped because stopping was a way to ask permission. The sky went a fraction darker as a cloud strolled over the sun and then kept going. I uncovered a piece of brass, about the size of a quarter with a keyhole in it. A padlock, but missing the shackle, only the body left. It had initials scratched into it across the tarnish. J and L stacked on each other inside a heart so faint. I only saw it when I turned the metal, and the sun stabbed it. I felt cold start in the center of my chest and move out to my fingers. Not fear. Recognition. I had seen padlocks like that on gym lockers and on the back gate at my grandmother's. They do not belong in dirt around a grave. I sat back on my heels and the smell came up like I had cracked a lid, the citrus soap. It was so strong my eyes watered. I looked over my shoulder like a kid caught stealing cookies. No one was there. A single grasshopper clicked and vaulted away. I wrapped the padlock in a clean shop rag and put it in my pocket, and the second I did it, I knew I had done a wrong thing. The air returned to normal. The smell went away like someone had let go of it. I scuffed the dirt back into place and patted it down as if the ground were the lap of a sleeping child. I walked to the truck, put the trowel in the bed, and sat with my hands on the wheel for a full minute before turning the key. That night the lights came without the cemetery. I woke at 3 with the taste of brass in my mouth and turned over to see an orange bead hovering near the apartment window. It wasn't outside. It was in the glass again, the way it had been in the truck window, as if the pane were a place and not a barrier. It hung there a long breath, then slid left and right, tracing a slow arc, and was gone. I could feel the outline of the padlock through the denim of my jeans where they lay on the chair. I got up and took the rag from the pocket and set it on the kitchen table. The metal felt warmer than it should have. I didn't touch it bare. I drove to Huntsville the next day with no deliveries on my schedule. I went to the prison museum on Highway 75 and walked into the cool dimness that holds old uniforms and black and white photos. The woman at the desk was the kind of polite that makes you want to be your best self. I told her I had found something in the cemetery and wanted to know if there was a place for objects like that. She listened with her fingers folded on a clipboard and didn't interrupt. "We don't take items from the cemetery," she said. "We don't encourage removal." She paused, and her gaze softened rather than hardened. "But you found a thing that someone meant to keep with them. That's different from a souvenir. Sometimes families bring us tokens when they get the remains later. Sometimes the grounds crew collects what rises up. I can tell you where to put it back." She took out a photocopied map and circled an X that matched the row. "That cross had a name for a while," she said. "Next of kin added a marker. It got stolen. Someone replaced it with a cross with a number. The initials match what the file used to say. Joe Lee. That's not his full name, but it's what he used with his friends." "How do you know that?" I said, and heard how defensive it sounded. "I don't," she said. "Not the way you mean. But the pattern fits. People kept locks. Something about the idea of keeping a thing shut appeals to men who could not go anywhere. You should put it back. That's the usual lesson, even if no one writes it down. You put back what you weren't supposed to take." I drove straight to the cemetery. It was late afternoon and a thunderhead hulked over the pines like a battleship. The air had that charged feeling it gets when rain is not a theory but a plan. I parked, walked in with the rag in my hand, and went to the cross. I didn't have to dig. The ground had heaved slightly as if breathing shallow. I set the padlock on the tamped clay and pressed with the flat of my palm. For a second the metal sank with a soft glug that I felt in my bones. I covered it with dirt until only a stipple of tarnish showed. I stood because kneeling any longer felt too much like prayer. There were no orange lights. I told myself that was good. I walked back to the gate and stopped with my hand on the chain link because a second gate knock sounded, a friendly rap like someone asking to come in. No one stood there. The knock came again from behind me. The cross line was empty, except for crosses. I didn't hurry, I didn't saunter, I left. The smell in my apartment went away that night. The bead of orange in the window did not come back. For a month Huntsville was regular. The deliveries were boxes and signatures. The air was hot. The prison museum had a new little display about the old baseball teams inmates used to have. The cemetery became a place I nodded toward when I drove past. A neighbor you feel tender toward for no reason. You can explain to anyone who didn't grow up on the street. I told myself a story about how grief needs handling, and I had handled it. I told myself the dead want the same things the living want. Not to be trifled with, not to be stolen from, not to be made into a spectacle. I was almost comfortable believing I had been given a task and I had done it well. Then Mara called again. She wanted to stop on her way down to Houston to see relatives. "I want my boring scientist moment," she said. "We'll go early, in daylight. I'll point at layers of atmosphere and particulate pollution and ruin the magic for you." We went on a Saturday morning that felt like a wet dog breathing on you. The sky was low. I parked in the same spot out of habit that now felt like ritual. We walked the fence line and I told her which row I had knelt beside. She made the kind of face she makes when she wants to be kind and correct at once. You can experience something and be wrong about what it is, she said. That's not an insult, that's being human. I put it back, I said, realizing I had used the wrong subject and object. She didn't ask what it was. Maybe she didn't want the part of the story you have to hold with both hands. We paused near the flattened circle of dirt. It was broader now, like more weight had been set there. Mara crouched and touched the edge with 2 fingers. She smelled her hand and frowned. Bleach, she said. Or citrus cleaner. I didn't say anything because my throat had done. That little click it does when you swallow and your body wants to remind you that swallowing is a choice. Let me do the thing, she said. If there are lights, there are sources. The prison is that way, the road is this way. We can line up sight lines and pick a rational explanation and go get kolaches. We lasted 15 minutes before the first orange appeared because that is how the world handles arrogance. It hung over the 3rd row inside the fence far from our angle to the highway. Light haze made the glow bigger than it was, and Mara did what she always does when she's surprised. She went quiet and her eyes got soft like the beginning of tears she would never allow. There's a car, she said, even though we both knew there wasn't. There's no car, I said. The second light came in the reflection in her sunglasses. That was new. The bead in the glass looked nearer than the one in the field. It moved when she turned her head and stayed still when she kept it steady. She removed the glasses and the light inside them winked out. She put them back on and the bead returned. She stood very still, like a deer does when a branch breaks in a direction it didn't expect noise to come from. I don't like it, she said, and her voice wasn't afraid so much as irritated at not being the smartest thing nearby. Then the knocking came, not loud, not from the fence. A polite sound, 3 raps on hollow metal from the direction of the new markers. Mara flinched. She is not a flincher. She turned toward the sound and took a step she didn't mean to. The light over the 3rd row dipped low as if bowing. I'm leaving, she said. Not a question, a plan. We walked to the truck, got in, and the moment my key turned in the ignition, the radio, which I keep set to a classic country station because it makes the miles behave, spat static and then voices. Not DJs, not ads, codes, a string of numbers and phonetic letters. A man's voice reading them slow and steady and then repeating them with a different cadence. I've heard scanner frequencies before. It sounded like what a guard might say when he wants to move a thing from one place to another and needs the numbers right, or he will do paperwork the rest of the day. I tried to switch stations, and the knob did nothing. I turned the radio off, and the speaker crackled once more and fell quiet like something holding its breath on the far side of a door. We drove back toward town without talking. Mara stared straight ahead until we hit the first red light, and then turned to me with a look I recognized from the years when we had been better at forgiving each other. You're not projecting, she said. I still don't know what it is, but you're not making it. I didn't want that absolution to feel like permission, and it did anyway. I went by the supplier, signed for boxes, and took the long way past the cemetery one more time before I left Huntsville. The pines were green. The sky was stupidly blue. Daylight does its best to make rules for the night to follow, but the night is eventually in charge. Since then, I don't go back. That is my current rule. I keep it not because I'm brave or because I solved anything, but because the padlock did not come back to my table, and because Mara sleeps better when I choose ordinary roads. The orange lights still show up if I drive late on 190. Sometimes, I catch one bobbing between the crosses even in the day, the way you see a gnat you don't swat because you know it will come back just to prove a point. I still smell the soap in my truck on hot afternoons when I haven't hauled anything but bottled water. Once, 2 months after I put the padlock back, I found a thin black line of grease across the inside of my windshield at eye level, as if someone's hand had rested there, and it made a shape like a heart if you squinted. I cleaned it with a paper towel and Windex, and the towel came away orange-gray, the color of rusted brass. Sometimes I tell this story and someone says, kind of smiling, "You're just trying to make Huntsville creepy." I wish I had that kind of time. The town handles its own creepiness fine. The cemetery isn't a haunted house. It isn't a theme park. It is a piece of ground that holds people who died in a system that keeps its own counsel. I don't think the lights mean harm. I think they want what everybody wants when they flicker in and out of other people's lives. To be noticed. To keep something that got taken. To hand a thing back that should not have gone missing. A month ago, I got a letter at the uniform supplier addressed to me. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a page from some old file. The words Joe Lee were typed neat and dark and full of angles, and under them a case number and an intake, date and a line that said next of kin unknown. The copy included a small photograph of a padlock, taken on a desk, the kind of picture a person takes when they catalog an item without any art. The initials in the heart were faint, but there. No name signed the letter. A sticky note inside said, "Bring him back if you can." That was it. I took the copy to the museum and showed the woman at the desk. She breathed out slowly through her nose and said, "Someone wants to be sure you didn't. Forget the lesson." I asked if the grounds crew had found the lock again. She didn't answer. She only said, "The thing about lanterns is they don't light up anywhere. They light up where they need to. If you drive west from Huntsville, after sundown the pines will lean close and the ditches will glitter and dim with whatever they swallow and leave. A field will open to your right and a white fence will hold you out, and inside that fence will be rows of crosses that say unknown, with numbers that mean someone counted you even if they didn't call you by your name. If you see a light, you can tell yourself it's a trick of refraction or a guard on rounds or a kid with a candle. You will be right in one way and wrong in another. If you smell soap that isn't there, you can roll up your window and turn on your radio and hope for a song you know by heart. If the station instead gives you numbers and letters, you can do what I did. Turn the knob until it relents and wait for the static to become silence. Then get where you're going. Don't look too long in the mirror. The rear view is a place where the night likes to make faces. I don't know if the lights call specific people, if they have a list, if they whisper your name the way a prison echoes back what you are willing to say. I know that I took a thing that wanted to be left and I put it back and that the world for a while loosened its grip. I know that when I pass the cemetery now and my eyes flicker that direction on their own, I say a small sentence I have made up for men I did not know. I say, "I see you." It is not much. It is not nothing. On the drive home the other night, a storm was working up and the first hard drops tapped the windshield. The sky lit white once and then settled. I slowed at the curve where the fence isn't straight. There was no one else on the road. In the corner of the window I saw an orange bead rise and waver and settle over the third row. Another came up farther back and drifted toward it like meeting a friend at a bus stop. They were not dramatic. They did not make a show of it. They did what lights have always done, which is promise that something is there even if you can't see what it is. I kept driving. I didn't count how many. I didn't need to. The town behind me worked at being what it is. The road ahead kept its promise to go on. The fence held. The field watched. The lanterns did their job steady as breathing, and I did mine, which for now is to keep going, to keep from taking anything else that isn't mine, and to tell you that if you find yourself out there at the right wrong hour, you will know them when you see them, and if you listen hard enough, you might hear the softest knock on a gate you can't see. And the lesson is not to open it, but neither is it to run. The lesson, as best as I have it, is to nod like you're passing a neighbor on a hot night and to let the light do what it has to do. I didn't go up there to chase ghosts. I went because every brochure in town pointed at that ridgeline and used words like heritage and frontier, and because I've always liked the way old cemeteries make the modern world feel quiet. Deadwood's Boot Hill leans over town like a warning. Hunched pines, lopsided markers, wind that smells like dry grass and old iron. It was early July, a hot day that softened toward a not-so-hot evening, and my friend Maya wanted sunset photos of the headstones. We were 2 hours into a quick road loop through the Black Hills. We'd eaten bison burgers and bought a magnet that said, "Watch your wallet. This is Deadwood." It felt like the kind of kitschy place where a person like me, who lives pretty square, can pretend to be a little reckless for a night. We walked up the gravel path with paper cups of gas station coffee and a bag of sunflower seeds, like we were going to a minor league game. People were still up there. Couples, a German family reading. Names out loud. A guy in a Sturgis tank top explaining to his girlfriend which gunfighter shot which. The markers were rough boards and chiseled stone, and a handful of white marble slabs that looked newer. Everything leaned a little. If you stood still, you could hear the town down below, music from a saloon, motorcycles crawling the canyon, road, laughter stretching thin in the dry air. It made the ridge feel higher than it was. Maya got into her photo trance. She does this thing where she forgets there's a world, and it's just the lens and the light. I wandered. The sun slid down behind the pines and turned the headstones into teeth. Flies settled. The German dad told his kids something about outlaws with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The Sturgis guy lost the thread of his story and shrugged and kissed his girlfriend on the temple. Another couple hurried through like they were late for something. I noticed him when the last real sunlight drained and everything leveled into that socked-in purple that's not quite night. The tall man in the black hat stood between two crooked markers like he'd been there all along. Black coat that swallowed the shape of him, shoulders straight, brim pulled low enough to be a polite excuse for not saying hello. He didn't move when the German family trudged past. He didn't turn when I did that half-wave you do with strangers in a quiet place. I thought he was part of some reenactor thing. That's big there. But there was nothing theatrical about him. He was just present, like a void is present. I shifted closer because that's who I am, the idiot who checks. My shoes scuffed the gravel. The man's shadow stretched the wrong way. Not dramatic, not horror movie obvious, but enough to make my stomach pull tight. The light was going, and his shadow went against it like it had its own rules. I blinked. He was 10 feet nearer. No sound of footsteps. The brim still cut his face into darkness. The air smelled like old dust and wet leather, even though it hadn't rained in days. I said, "Maya?" She didn't answer. My throat did a dry click. I turned to where she'd been. She had moved higher, toward a cluster of wooden boards so warped they looked like driftwood. She was kneeling to get a shot through 2 boards, her back to me. She still hadn't seen him. I took a step back. My heel hit the edge of a sunken plot and slid. The hat man's head tipped the smallest degree, as if he were noticing that I'd noticed. He wasn't looming. He wasn't reaching. He just shortened the gap whenever I couldn't keep both eyes open at once. The purpling sky dimmed, fast the way it does in the hills, and the town became a set of coins scattered in the dark. I bolted. I don't know when I decided to run. I just did. I ran down the hill past Maya, who shouted, "What?" and then shouted my name when she saw my face. I didn't stop until I hit the gate. When I risked a look back, the black hat hovered above. The markers at the top of the slope, same spot. Wrong way shadow like a stain on the air. "Hey!" Maya was breathless at my shoulder. "What the hell? Did you see him?" "Who?" "The guy. The hat." She looked past me. The ridge was dark now. Cars' headlights pinched through the pines on the road below. A moth pinged against the rusty sign that warned about rattlesnakes. "I saw you bolt like you'd been stung," she said. "I didn't see anyone. Did you?" I didn't want to say I was scared by a mannequin. My heart was thumping high and loose. I said, "I think I'm just fried. Let's go." Back in town, the tourists had clicked into evening mode. Neon, country covers, laughter that had a little too much helium. We ducked into a bar, not the gimmicky one with a fake poker table. The smaller one where the bartender had lines in his face and the beer didn't pretend to be old-timey. The wood was dark and sticky at the edges, from 100,000 elbows. A cowboy hat hung on a nail by the TV. It wasn't black and it looked soft with use. I was halfway through my first beer when I realized the cowboy hat on the nail wasn't casting a shadow on the wall behind it. I stared until it did. My neck prickled. I told myself to get over it. The bartender, who introduced himself as Trent, asked if we were in for the night or trying to win our gas money back on the slots. He had the calm of someone who has seen every version of a tourist crisis. Maya, who likes people immediately and permanently until they prove she shouldn't, told him we'd gone up to Boot Hill. "Before sundown?" he asked. "Right at," she said. He looked at me when he asked, "Anything strange?" I almost laughed. Then I didn't. Maybe. Trent's expression did that subtle shift that says I'm not a believer, but I've heard a lot. "If you did," he said, "you either leave town tonight or you go pay your $1. "What $1? Maya asked. "You go back up," he said. "You say your name. You pay your $1. He flicked his chin toward the tip jar, then shook his head quick like he shouldn't have pointed at that. "Not to a person, to the hill. Leave it on the first marker to the left of the path. Don't turn your back to the middle. Keep your head still and your eyes moving. Don't let them catch you blinking." Maya grinned, ready for a story. "They? The hill's full," he said. "Most folks are sleeping like they're supposed to. A handful ain't. The black hat..." He stopped. He glanced at the TV as if it might be listening. "Don't say you didn't hear, but don't go telling everybody. It gets people amped. And I don't want to be the one that sends you up. They're to get spooked worse." I said, "Why, we'll skip it." "You should either skip town," he said, "or pay. Sleeping on it invites company. He likes a name. If he knows your name, he gets to keep calling it." "Calling it where?" Maya asked, lighter now, teasing. "Right outside your door," he said, and smiled like he was kidding. But he wasn't. We walked back to the motel with that barroom smell in our clothes. The place was a 2-story strip with doors that opened, straight to the parking lot, every car's hood ticking as it cooled. Our room was upstairs at the end, under a humming light. The kind of place where the bedspread has a geometrical pattern designed to hide stains. I showered until the water ran cold. When I came out, Maya had all her photos dumped onto her laptop. She showed me a frame where the markers were gold teeth in the last light, another where a pine branch crossed the sky like a vein. Then she froze the slideshow. "Huh," she said. "What?" She zoomed in on the background of a shot I didn't remember her taking. It was the path. A couple was heading down. There was a shape higher up between 2 boards, nothing but a rectangle of darker dark topped with a curve like a brim. If you didn't know to look, you'd miss it. If you'd seen him, your scalp prickled. "That?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. She turned the laptop so the screen faced away from me. "Want me to throw it out so you don't think about it?" "Don't be weird," I said, but my voice sounded thin. We propped the door chair under the handle because the motel gave us that kind of vibe, not because of ghosts. We watched terrible TV with the volume low. Around midnight, tired finally outpaced nerves. We fell asleep with the AC rattling. A knock woke me. Not hard, polite, in a rhythm you'd use if you wanted a stranger to open up. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. The room was jellyfish dark, the TV a dead mirror, the AC gone silent like it had been doing too much and needed a break. I lay there hoping it was in my dream. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Maya whispered. "You hear that?" I said. "No." Which meant yes. The knock started again, not at the door, at the window. We were on the 2nd floor. The blinds clicked with each tap like a nail brushed them. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I got up, because not getting up was worse. I stood where the blinds were and put my fingers under the edge. The knock stopped. I didn't look outside. I can't explain why. My hand shook because it wanted to look. I didn't. The knocks moved to the door again. The chair, under the handle, clicked 1/8 of an inch like something pressed exactly as much as the strength of the chair allowed, then released. I put my mouth close to the door and said, "Who is it?" A voice said my name. Calm. Not a question, not a threat. Just a man saying my name in a tone like a clerk calling you when it's your turn. Maya squeezed my elbow. It made me realize how cold my skin was. I said, "You've got the wrong room." He said my name again, a little closer to the crack, like his mouth was a breath from the wood. It wasn't loud. It didn't sound like a prank. It sounded like someone with a job to do. I pulled the chair back and opened the door fast because the idea of the knock being patient was worse than any jump scare. The parking lot was empty in the way a space gets empty after midnight. One truck, 2 bikes, a soda can rolling on somewhere. The bulb above our door made a cone and insects scribbled in it. No one stood on the landing, no one on the stairs. There was a wet leather smell, though, and the particular cold of outside when you aren't dressed for it. When I closed the door, something small slid against the carpet. A coin. Silver. It must have been wedged in the hinge. Maya bent and picked it up. A quarter. Not special except for how cold it was. It had the year 1998 and a scar like a nick on the edge. Maybe some kid jammed it there, she said, like a thought half built. We put it on the dresser and tried to laugh. I didn't sleep after that. The knocks didn't come back. At a little insane hour, I dozed with my shoes still on. Deadwood looked different in the morning, like the set. Had powers down. Backdrop rolled aside. People with brooms scraping glitter off the floor. We left the motel key on the counter and went for breakfast because the world felt safer with eggs. Maya said a half dozen times that we should get out. Then she said a half dozen times that we couldn't leave without at least driving by Boot Hill, because she wanted one photo of it in daylight to anchor the weird one from the night before. We drove up, didn't park. There was a school bus there. Kids filed out holding worksheets, a teacher calling roll. Little voices reading names, off the stones like they were practicing phonics. I was safely inside the car, windows up, midday sun bleaching everything. I was telling myself that nothing bad ever happens when the sun is high and the world is full of noise. A shadow crossed the windshield, moving the wrong direction compared to the sun. Not dramatic, just the faint sweep of a brim cutting the light as if a man had stood in front of us and then no longer did. I made a noise I don't make, a small sound like a squeaky shoe. Maya swore. She put the car in drive without looking at me and rolled us out and down toward the highway like we had a schedule we were very late for. We thought getting miles between us and that ridge would do it. The road through the hills is all curves and old rock faces that feel close enough to touch. Every pull-off has a view with a plaque. At the second pull-off, Maya said she wanted to check a tire because the car felt soft on turns. We stopped in a turnout where a fence ran along a drop into pines. There were ribbons tied to the fence, plastic memorial things that fluttered and snapped in the wind. We got out. The tire was fine. When I stood up, my shadow went east. Hers went east. A third shadow went west, brushing the fence and lifting, a ribbon like a hand. Then it was gone. We didn't talk about it. We got back in. There's a quality to fear that compacts your decisions. The world becomes a list. Drive, don't stop, don't look in mirrors unless you have to. We hit I-90 and went east because that felt like the strongest direction away. We were 30 minutes out when Maya said, "I think we should go back." I said, "Say that again slower." "He wants $1, she said. "We could mail it," I said. "Certified." "He wants to hear your name on the hill," she said. That's how Trent told the story. It sounded like a joke at the bar. It doesn't sound like a joke to me now. I was quiet long enough that the road drowned us. Then I said, "I think if we go back, we'll be giving it more of us." She drove. She chewed her thumbnail the way she does when she fights an answer. She said finally, "I can't have this thing in our car." At a gas station with a casino and a gift shop and a stuffed bison that kids climbed, we stopped and stood in the fluorescent hum pretending to look at beef jerky like we didn't need to make a decision. I picked up a pack that said peppered real cowboy style and almost laughed. Outside, a guy in a leather vest with an eagle patch leaned against his bike and watched the sky like it was a show. Even out here, the air held a hint of something that wasn't the day's heat or the smell of diesel. Back in the car, the coin we'd put on the dresser in the motel sat in the cup holder. Neither of us had put it there. I stared at it a full 20 seconds. Maya reached slow and took it and put it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "$1, she said, although it wasn't. We turned around. Trent didn't act surprised. When we slid back onto the same bar stools and told him we'd changed our minds, He poured us waters without being asked. "Sun goes down in an hour," he said, squinting toward the door. "If you're going, go now. Don't make it a midnight thing. People do midnight and think they're brave. Brave isn't useful up there." "What happens if we don't?" I asked. "You'll hear your name," he said, "in places it shouldn't be. Hallways, parking lots, at stoplights with your windows up. Eventually you'll answer. Then you'll set a foot where you shouldn't and it'll be done." "What's his deal?" Maya said. "Why the hat?" Trent considered. "Every town has an undertaker," he said. "Every story needs a shape. Some people in old photos wore black because it looked nice in daylight and didn't show dirt. Some people wore it because it made your edges less interesting. He's like that. The idea of a man sent to bring you along. It's not complicated, he's not sentimental. Don't make him into more than that. If you owe, you pay. If you don't borrow." "Has he taken anyone you knew?" I asked. He didn't answer. He wiped the bar with a towel and set it down and said, "If you go, go together. If he gets between you, don't blink. Walk slow. Don't run. Running makes your eyes stupid." On the way up the hill, my legs felt like I'd already climbed it twice. The air had that cooled down honesty of evening. The path was empty except for us. No kids, no German family, no Sturgis tank top. The pines clicked. The town made a sound like a radio in another room. We stopped at the first marker to the left. The wood was soft and the carved name had a loop in the middle that looked like it had been done with a dull knife. I put the quarter on top. It stayed like a piece of ice. Maya whispered, "Say it." I said my name. It felt wrong to say it loud in a place like that, like I was waking people. My voice bounced off the boards and came back thinner. The trees breathed. Nothing else changed. We walked. The hill opened ahead like a small, honest city. Rows of markers, small fences around family plots, little weeds that smelled like dust when you brushed them. We moved our heads without moving our bodies, the way Trent said, like we were on a swivel with careful bearings. Every time the world dimmed, which it did in pulses as the sun folded itself away, I felt the urge to blink hard. Every time I did, I forced one eye to stay open. It made my head hurt. It made my stomach roll. It felt like looking down from a ladder and trying not to notice how far it is. We passed the pair of boards where Maya had taken the photo. There was nothing between them. A sound came from the center of the hill. Not a knock, not a footstep. Spurs, I thought, except I've never been in a place where spurs made sound. It was a jingle that wasn't metal and wasn't wind, and when it came, my teeth felt it. I didn't look there. I looked at the ground a foot in front of me and at the edge of my vision where anything wrong would try to sneak. Maya squeezed my hand once hard. Her palm was damp. It made me feel less alone and more exposed at once. We reached the rise where I'd first spotted him the night before. He was there. The black hat made a slice in the light. The wrong way shadow was a stain across 3 markers. The coat ate the shape of his body so that I couldn't tell if he was lean or broad. Only his height was sure. He was taller than any man I know by a head and a half. Not freakish. Just enough to make you want to be polite. He tipped his chin like he was counting us, I said, without thinking. "We paid." Idiot thing to say, as if we were at a toll. He didn't move. "Sir?" Maya said in this split tone she uses when she talks to bouncers and old men in parks and museum guards. "We're leaving now." She said my name, soft, as if reminding the night that I already belonged to the living side. He took one step. Not with a sound, not with emotion. He was just one step nearer, after the second I needed to register that he was there. It felt like a glitch in a video call when the other person jerks. Closer with a buffer hiccup. The brim of his hat kept his face in a hollow. When he breathed in, if he breathed at all, the ground did it, not his chest. I tried Trent's instructions in my head like a mantra. Don't run. Don't blink. Keep your head still. Eyes moving. Maya said in a normal voice. "My name is Maya. You can't call me anymore." She said it like a boundary to a person who might care about such a thing. He took another step. The wrong way shadow slid like a lid over the boards. A breeze picked up in the pines and bent them. His hat didn't move at all. I said my name again, because saying it once had felt insufficient. Saying it twice felt like I'd signed something. He tilted his head more, the hollow where his face should be deepened, as if the night had thickened there. Behind us, a small thing clinked. I didn't turn. "Don't," Maya whispered, as if she could feel the urge start in my shoulders. Another small clink, like a coin settling on wood. A series of them now, scattered. Dink, dink, ding, like pocket change loosed on a table. I pictured the quarter we'd left, and a dozen more like it, hopping out of nothing to pay a tab we didn't understand. He took another sideways knot step, and now he stood where he would be able to get between us and the path if he wanted to. The brim angle changed as if his attention altered, and for a thin second I saw a shape under the brim. Not a face. Not eyes. Just a texture like rain on old pavement, the way water blackens rock until it doesn't have color, only dark. He said my name. It sounded exactly the way it had at the door. Calm. Not an invitation, a designation. The sound went under my ribs and made me want to step forward to make it stop. Maya lifted her camera without looking through it and clicked the shutter 3 times. The motor of the focus whirred like a toothpick. The sounds were tiny and ridiculous in the open. He said her name, as if it had been available to him now that she'd offered it. "Now we go," she said louder. "Thank you for your time." It was such a dumb thing to say that it pushed air out of my lungs in a half laugh. It gave me enough oxygen to move. We took a step backward, keeping our heads steady. He held still for that step. We took another. The hill behind us was a slope with a dozen places to twist an ankle or step through mulch into rot. I wanted to look. I forced my eyes to do the work of not looking. A shape moved at the edge of my vision, a small one lower to the ground, where a tiny fence boxed in 3 stones. It leaned up like a person rising from a stoop. It wasn't the Hat Man. It was something less interested in courtesy. It watched us with no head to tilt. As if my brain couldn't handle 2 ideas at once, my fear narrowed back to the black. He was still the axis. Everything else was commentary. He said my name again, and the sound folded the night at the edges like paper creasing. I tasted metal. He didn't reach, he didn't point, he didn't bother to make a convincing human show of being there. He didn't need to. He was where you have to step if you want to leave. Maya said, as if to a skittish dog. "We're going. Home now?" And took another backward step. The ground under my heel gave. Not much. Enough to tell me that if I put more weight there, I'd drop calf-deep into soil that had given up keeping itself firm. The problem of being careful with your eyes is that your feet get stupid. I threw my weight forward too fast, my knee twinged. Maya grabbed my sleeve and redirected me left. The Hat Man's head tipped as if amused. "Don't," I said, and I'm not sure to which of us. Maybe to my legs, maybe to the hill. We edged. The path widened near the gate. The pines did that groan that might be wind, or might be wood remembering storms. The coins had stopped clinking. The air pressed down like a hand. At the gate, we didn't run. We walked as if we were in a room, and the host was someone we couldn't afford to insult. When we were 3 steps past the threshold, the smell of wet leather thinned and the sound of the town, which had been tinny and far, arrived in a rush. Forks, laughter, the stupid music that my brain clung to like a rope. In the car, doors slammed loud like they had been waiting to. Maya started the engine. We drove slow until the ridge was behind us. Only when we hit Main Street did we let our mouths fall open and the sort of hysterical half-laughing start. It didn't last. There was nothing funny to metabolize. Back at the bar, Trent nodded once like a man ticks off a box on a form. He poured me a coffee without rolling his eyes that I asked for one after 9 at night. "You paid," he said. "We said our names," Maya said. "That's the bit that matters," he said. "The coin's tradition. The name is the line." I asked, not sure why I needed to. "What happens to the people who don't?" "They start to mistake him for something obliging," he said. "Like he'll wait, or like he can be reasoned with. They make deals in their heads. He doesn't deal. What about you? I asked. You ever hear your name? He met my eyes for the first time that night and held them longer than a bartender owes a stranger. Not anymore, he said, and the way he said it is the thing that made me decide never to be in Deadwood after sundown again. We left town in the dark, which felt stupid but also felt like the only honest way to go. The ridge was a block of deeper night against a star-hazed sky. No shape stood against it. No wrong-way shadow fell across the road. I wanted to believe that was the end of it. The world is simpler if rituals work and debts clear, and your life keeps a neat ledger. 2 days later, back home, Maya sent me a text with a photo attached, one of the frames she'd shot at the hill and forgotten in her card dump. It was underexposed and had that glitchy digital noise like snow. Between two leaning boards, the black eating light shape sat there more solidly than I remembered. In the pixel smear where his face should be, something lighter flecked the black like dust in a sunbeam. Except there was no sun. She'd circled it, which made me angry because a circle makes a thing official and I didn't want it to be. Under that, another photo. The dresser in the motel, the quarter on the wood. I hadn't seen her take that. The coins scar like a nick. The way the light hit it made it look wet. I texted back, "Why that one?" She wrote, "Look closer at the edge where the nick is." I pinched the screen. On the wood next to the coin in the cheap varnish there was a faint groove I hadn't noticed. A line like a nail had traced something. Not a picture. A letter. The first letter of my name. I could see where it started. I could see where the stroke stopped, like the nail had been lifted when I opened the door. I didn't sleep that night. I listened for knocks that didn't come. The next day the knocks came, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, from my apartment's hall, where there's no one I know and no reason for anyone to be. I opened the door. The corridor was empty, the light flickering. On my welcome mat, a coin. Not the same quarter. This one was duller, older. I didn't touch it. If this ends like a tidy story, I'd tell you I took it back to Deadwood and found a way to set it back where it belonged. I haven't. I don't think belonging is part of his job. I think the job is simpler. He likes a name, and once he knows yours, he calls it until you answer. You can push that moment back with rules. Pay what the place wants. Don't turn your back to the center. Keep one eye open when you're sure you need both closed. But it's not a fix, it's just time. Some nights when the AC cuts off and the room holds its breath, I hear the polite rhythm on my door. Some nights, nothing. You start to live in the maybe. There's a small evidence drawer by my sink now. In it is a Ziploc with the first quarter. In another is a Polaroid Maya took the week after we got back, like a dare to the room to be ordinary. It came out gray and soft and shows our kitchen table and 2 mugs and a rectangle of light. In the left edge of the frame, cutting the band of light, is a shadow with a curve at the top like a brim. Maybe it's the lamp. Maybe it's what a man who is a job looks like when he visits places where people keep their names. People in the comments will ask if I'm making this up, and I wish I could convincingly commit to a lie. I'm a boring person, the way bank tellers are boring. If this was a story, I'd have better dramatic instincts. I'd give you a twist. The closest I can come is the thing Trent said the second time we went back. When I asked if anyone ever sees the Hat Man's face, he said, "They see what they deserve." And I'm not sure whether he meant that no one sees anything except what they bring to it, or that everyone sees something different, or that the blank is the point. A face would be merciful. A face could be recognized, bargained with, even hated. A job is just a job. We still don't say our names out loud in cemeteries, even the pretty ones with statues and birds that don't mind you walking past. When we pass a hat on a hook, my gut checks shadows on the wall. When someone knocks and then pauses and knocks again, I wait an extra breath and look through the peephole and think of wood gouged by a nail writing the first letter, over and over, until I pull the door wide or don't. I'm not brave. I'm not interesting. I am someone who left $1 and said his name and learned that being careful doesn't erase a thing. It just postpones it. I don't know if he follows everybody who lingers on that ridge at sundown, or just the ones who look directly at him. If you go, go while the light is still big and sloppy with safety, and leave when the day starts to draw itself tight. Pay your dollar if it will make you feel like your edges are still yours. Say your name like you're carving it in air where the living can read it. And when you come back down into the noise and the neon and you feel for a second that everything is fine, don't look back to check. Don't to see if there's a hat shape rising black against the sky. Some things don't need to be confirmed to do their work. Deadwood is full of little museums and reenactments and plaques with dates, and I'm sure they'll tell you who is buried where and what gun was used and which shootout happened on which corner. None of that matters to the man in the black hat. He's not there for history, he's there for inventory. If he's not calling your name tonight, be grateful. If he is, I'm sorry. You can buy time. You can close one eye and keep the other burning wide. You can talk to bartenders who have learned how not to be impressed. You can move houses and states. You can tape over your peephole and sleep with a fan on and learn to breathe through the pause between knocks. But the brim will still cut the light a little wrong. The shadow will still go the way shadows aren't supposed to. And if you blink even just once, you'll open to find him half the distance closer. People in Chicago talk about Bachelor's Grove like it's a dare you pass down. The place is tiny, just a handful of old stones among crooked pines and a dark pond, tucked behind a sagging chain-link fence across from Rubio Woods off the Midlothian Turnpike. In daylight, you can almost believe it's just another scrap of the forest preserve, sad and a little forgotten. At night, it's a different animal. I learned that during my junior year, on a damp fall evening when the humidity clung to your shirt and the insects sounded like wires sizzling in the trees. There were 4 of us. Me, my roommate Dan, his cousin Alex, who'd just moved up from Joliet, and my ex Kayla, who I was trying to pretend I could be normal around. It was one of those college city weekends where nobody had money and everybody had a car that only sort of worked. So we took Dan's Civic, which squeaked every time he tapped the brakes. We parked in the lot across the road, under the big forest, preserves of Cook County sign, and for a minute we just sat there with the engine off listening to the bugs and the distant hiss of traffic. The sky had that brownish city glow, but the woods swallowed it. It felt like looking into a mouth. I only agreed to go because it sounded like a joke. Kayla had a friend at Moraine who said she'd gone at midnight and heard a woman wailing, like a whistle stuck in a throat. Alex said his buddy from work saw a house out there one night, a farmhouse that isn't there in the daytime. Dan said it was all just the way the wind runs through the pines. That sound they make like a stadium is far away. White noise and drunks telling stories, he said, stuffing a little LED flashlight into his pocket. We crossed the road and ducked the fence at a place where it sagged. The path was packed dirt-edged with dead needles. The air changed inside the tree line. I could smell the swamp, a sweet, coated smell like old leaves left to rot in a bucket. I remember the way my breath felt colder than the air when I exhaled, like the inside of my mouth had goosebumps. Kayla walked ahead of me, and I watched the beam of her flashlight bounce across roots and beer cans and a discarded bouquet, wrapped with a ribbon that still had a florist's sticker on it. People were always bringing Bachelor's Grove offerings, for ghosts or for TikToks. It felt wrong to me, like leaving a teddy bear on an old injury. The cemetery itself was smaller than I expected. 12 stones maybe, and only half of those standing. Some had sunk so far they looked like teeth, gray edges under dirt. The pines ringed the clearing like spectators. Off to one side, the pond lay black and glossy behind cattails. That pond is where all the stories center. The things people say they saw across it, the lights, the lady in white, the movement you can't name. In the summer, there are frogs, but that night the insects were loud and the water was still. I walked over and stood on the bank. Something flat was just below the surface, a plastic bag probably. It swayed when I leaned and made the faintest ripple like a detail caught breathing. We didn't go at midnight. We weren't trying to be heroes. It was just past 9. Dan checked his phone and said we had plenty of time before any cops started doing laps. We stood in a loose circle by a toppled stone that had the letters AM visible through dirt. Alex said, "That's cheerful," and then nudged it with his sneaker like it would flip and reveal the rest of the name. Kayla crouched and brushed at it with gloved fingers. "Don't do that," I said, and I heard my voice as if it belonged to someone else. The cemetery made me polite in a way I wasn't used to. I kept thinking about how the families who buried people here never expected 4 idiots with flashlights to be leaning over their dead 100 years later. For a while we just wandered. I pointed out a little rusting fence around nothing, the hinges grown into a trunk, and Kayla found a half-melted candle with a scrap of red wax smeared like lipstick. We all avoided the pond without saying so. I took out my phone to take a picture and watched the camera search for a face to focus on among the stones. The autofocus box kept jumping at empty air. I clicked the phone off and the darkness seemed to push closer, greedy to fill the gap the screen left. Small things happened first. That's how you get softened up, like the place is knocking to see if you'll answer. The insects went quiet for maybe 3 seconds and then came back all at once. A pine cone fell and hit the ground right behind me. Kayla's flashlight faded to a dull yellow and then flared back up, like something pinched the filament with 2 fingers and let go. Dan laughed too loud at all of it. "Seriously? The woods are doing wood stuff," he said, which sounded defensive even to him. I wandered toward the fence line and saw what looked like a faint trail through the needles, less from footsteps and more from the weight of eyes. It led between 2 scraggly pines that touched at the top like a crooked archway. When I stepped under them, I felt that pressure change you get when an elevator starts, the blood settling. I said, "Hey, you guys," and they came over. Dan rolled his eyes at my emphasis. "Yes? Oh, great tour guide?" But then he stepped under the arch and stopped complaining. His shoulders lifted like he needed more space for his breath. On the other side of the little arch, the ground slanted toward the water. The cattails weren't straight. They bowed toward the pond like they'd grown weary of standing up. The path curved to the right and disappeared. Kayla said, "There's no path on Google, but we followed it anyway because we had flashlights and the idea of turning around made an embarrassed part of my brain itch." After 20 steps, the cemetery fell away behind us and there were only the pines again, closer here, whispering with that hissing aliveness like a whisper passed through a crowd. Alex walked point, Dan behind him, then me, then Kayla. There's something specific about walking single file at night. The way you become responsible for the person in front of you. Like if they vanished between steps, it would be your fault. I kept my light on Alex's ankles and saw the dark cuffs of water on his jeans where he'd skidded at the pond. That tiny, familiar detail helped for maybe 10 seconds. Then my light struck something white ahead, low to the ground. We all stopped. It was a stone, not a marker exactly. More like a chunk of concrete half buried, a corner at an angle with a metal loop embedded in it. Kayla shone her beam and said, "Tether," which made my stomach feel the way it did when I was a kid and realized the word undertow involved hands. Everything stayed level until we heard the first cry. I will try very hard not to make it into something more dramatic than it was, because that's the problem with telling this story. I need you to believe me. You know how sometimes a train breaks in winter and it makes that high scraping whine that prickles your teeth? Start there. Now make it thinner, as if it doesn't have mass behind it. Sharpen it until it slices through your ear instead of pressing on it. It came from our left, from the black behind the pines, and it flared up like something had been yanked free of a throat. Alex flinched so hard I bumped into him. Dan said, "Coyotes," reflexively, and then swallowed because he knew he was wrong. "Woman," Kayla said, not like a question. And then it happened again, only this time it ricocheted. I don't have a better word. The sound bounced between the trees and across the water, and I couldn't tell where the beginning of it was. It was like a long rubber band snapped and never had an origin point. On the second cry, all the pines seemed to inhale. The needles hissed louder, and I had a sudden cartoony idea that each needle was a mouth. "Okay," Dan said, in a bright voice that meant he was done. "Okay, that's our cue." He turned and I saw his face in the flashlight. Too white in the cheeks, his mouth twisted into a smile that wasn't for anyone. We started back, and walking the other way felt wrong immediately, like migrating against a current. The path had shifted. I swear to you it had been a simple curve, a half moon down to the water, but now it forked in a slumped Y and neither side looked familiar. I could see the glow of the turnpike through the trees in both directions, two different ghosts of the same road. Left, Alex said. It was left. So we went left and the ground got softer. My sneaker sank and made a quiet sucking noise and every animal part of me wanted out of there. The scream came again, higher now, and I felt it inside my sinuses. Kayla grabbed my arm hard enough that her nails stung. "It's moving," she said, and she was right. The sound didn't just bounce, it traveled, it circled, picked a point, then picked another, as sure as a hand on a clock face. I realized, with a cold clarity that felt like stepping outside my own skin, that it wasn't only a voice. There was shape in it. Patterns I couldn't recognize, but that made my nerves try to line up in recognition anyway, like a language I used to know as a kid. We walked faster. The path tried to convince us it wasn't a path. Cattails leaned in. A branch grabbed Dan's jacket zipper and rasped down it, metal on bark like a toy saw, and he swore and yanked free, and I saw how his hands shook. The scream came again, now with the faintest underhum like soundboard feedback. "Phone off," Kayla said, which made no sense, but we all did it. The hum didn't stop. I remember passing a tree with a metal sign tacked into it, the kind with blank reflective sheeting, and seeing that the nails had rusted in streaks that looked like fingers. I remember the taste of penny in my mouth, the little shock of static when I brushed a branch. The scream ratcheted up so thin I thought it would pass out the top of hearing and vanish. But before it could, it broke with a wet little catch, like a swallowed sob. For the first time I thought, that thing hurts. It hurts to make that noise. And then I thought, the stupid, worst thought, it noticed us noticing. We hit the fence line. I could have kissed the cheap chain link. I let out a sound that was almost a laugh. There was the little slump where we'd slipped under. Dan crouched and shoved through. Alex followed, then Kayla. The scream cut off. Not faded. Stopped. The silence after was weirdly soft like a pillow, and I could hear my own breath in the traffic again. 1,000 tiny human lives taking their separate routes home. We walked fast to the car without talking. At the lot, there was a Forest Preserve Patrol SUV idling 2 spaces over. The cop inside glanced at us, the way a cashier glances at you when you're buying NyQuil and Gatorade and obviously a bad night. Dan fumbled the keys, and we all got in and closed the doors, and for a second just sat with our foreheads against the seats. I didn't realize how tense my back had been until it hurt to relax it. "Coyotes," Dan said again, more to the steering wheel than to us. Right? He wanted us to agree so he could believe he wasn't lying. Alex rubbed his face and said, "Nothing." Kayla took my wrist and turned it over. "You're bleeding," she said. A neat line of red crossed my skin where a branch had kissed me. I hadn't felt it happen. On the drive back into the city, the Civic's windows fogged from how hard we were breathing. We put the heat on, then the AC, then cracked the windows, then shut them. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that we were all still trying to get our lungs to behave. I stared at the black ribbon of the turnpike and watched how the woods gave way to strip malls and eventually to the orange wash of the skyline. Kayla's phone buzzed in the cup holder. She picked it up, frowned, and put it back like it stung. "Spam caller," she said, but her voice sounded far away. I dropped the others off and went back to my place near UIC. My apartment smelled like last week's cooked onions and laundry detergent. I stood in the kitchen for a while just listening to the hum of the fridge and feeling stupid for being afraid of a sound. I finally took a shower, and when I got out, I noticed my phone charging on the sink had the voice memos app open. I hadn't opened it, it was recording. The timer read 00713. I hit stop, my finger slippery with water, and stared at the saved file. New recording 47, time-stamped at 10:08 p.m. That was when we were on the path. I carried the phone into the bedroom like a bomb. I told myself not to press play. I told myself there was no reason to press play. I pressed play. At first there was nothing. Then my own breath, too close to the mic, a sticky rush of it, And underneath it, the pines. If you've never recorded wind in trees, you don't know that it makes this hiss that would be almost calming if it didn't contain pauses where your body expects words. My voice came next, low. You guys? It sounded like me calling from the bottom of a well. And then the scream. Even tinny through the phone speaker, even compressed and rendered and half-eaten by the cheap mic, it slid between my ribs. It bounced. It circled. There was a crackle, maybe me shifting the phone in my pocket. After the third cry, something else came through. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even human. But it had timing like speech. In a conversational little lull between two peaks of the scream, the recorder caught a sound like a single, clean pluck on a taut string. There was a stretch of silence not of absence, but of listening. And then, low and not in my language, the underhum resolving into something that made the hair on my chest stand up, a descending tone, like the sound a kettle makes right before it dies. It lasted exactly as long as breathing out. I stopped the recording with my thumb shaking. I put the phone face down on the dresser and crawled into bed with that childish determination to sleep so hard nothing could get in. At 2:03 a.m., my phone rang. The number was unknown. My stomach felt like I'd missed a step. I thumbed it on and said hello the way you say hello to a wrong number, generous, already forgiving. What I got was the scream, far away and small and perfectly placed behind my ear. The call ended before I could say anything. The log showed nothing. No missed call, no received call, just the dim glow of the screen and my face reflected in it, looking older. In the morning, the story took on the quality that all bad nights have when sun hits them. It separated into items that could be dismissed. Wind, animals, someone else, out there in the woods having a bad trip and entertaining themselves by scaring high school kids. Dan texted that he'd looked it up and banshee noises were a known phenomenon with certain owls. He linked an article that mentioned nothing about owls. Alex didn't text at all. Kayla sent me a photo she'd taken from the bank of the pond. It was beautiful in a dead way, the water like black satin, a ripple V through it where a bug skated. There was a whole world of sensible explanations available, and I was hungry to pick one. I went to class and took notes and smiled at jokes and tried to pretend my body didn't keep thinking it heard a thin curve of sound under ordinary conversation. Around 4 that afternoon, a news alert popped up on my phone about the preserves. They'd found a missing man in a retention pond off 131st. Not Bachelor's Grove, but close enough for the map to feel like an accusation. The article was clinical. A name and age, 2 sentences from a sergeant reminding hikers not to go off established trails. There was a photo of the water cordoned with tape, men standing in waders, one hand on a rope, one hand shielding eyes. I stared at it until the angles of the image stopped meaning anything. I didn't tell anyone about the call. I didn't send them the recording. It felt wrong, like giving out a key to a lock that wasn't mine. For a week I slept with a quilt over my head like a kid and woke with my throat sore from grinding my teeth. Then life diluted it. It always does. Midterms came. I got a job at the coffee shop on Taylor and burnt my wrist on steam twice because I tried to watch a girl with a red scarf while tamping espresso. I made plans with Dan to look at a new apartment. Kayla started seeing somebody who pronounced gyro correctly and said he'd never understood the point of scary stories. 3 months later, winter came in earnest. The city went from gray to iron, snow-layered noise on everything. I walked home from my late shift one night with the temperature below 0 and my breath crystallizing in my scarf. The city was beautiful, the way a clean razor is beautiful. Somewhere on Canal, a plow scraped and sparked. I cut down an alley to shave a minute off the walk, and in the darkest part of it, where the snow drifted over the lip of a loading dock and the dumpsters made shapes, I stopped because I heard it. Not loud, not high enough to wake dogs, just a thin thread of it. The scream unwound until it was the suggestion of a scream. It was inside the sound of the wind running between the apartment buildings, like the pines had learned to speak brick. It curled around me and then through me and tugged at the place under my jaw that aches when I get a cold. I stood very still with the steam of my breath collapsing around my face, and I thought, It labels itself by place. It called itself through. Trees there, so it can call itself through alleys here. I didn't go back to Bachelor's Grove. I took the long way around when friends wanted to drive the turnpike and show out-of-towners the haunted fence. But the thing isn't limited by my choices. The recording stayed on my phone until an update wiped it, and even after it was gone, I could see the waveform in my mind. Those peaks like thin mountains, the sudden drop into that listening silence. I dated someone else and moved apartments and changed majors because a professor looked at me and said, "Office jobs made better horror writers than art did." Time did what it does. It allowed me to almost forget. Last summer, I was back near the preserves for a cookout at a friend's place in Oak Forest. People brought their kids and set up a cornhole board on the patchy grass and argued about whether the Sox would ever do anything different. I went inside to refill the ice bucket and found Kayla alone at the sink, looking out the small window toward the line of trees at the edge of the subdivision. We hadn't seen each other in a year. She was thinner in a way that made her look temporarily older, like an understudy stepping into a part. We did the awkward "how are you" dance, and then she said, "Do you ever think about that night?" The way she asked it told me she thought about it a lot. I told her yes, and that sometimes I hear the woods under city sounds. She didn't laugh. She said, "2 weeks after that night, my neighbor, do you remember Mrs. N?" I did vaguely, a tiny lady who'd always tried to give us brownies. She'd baked for him the box. Kayla said Mrs. N's grown son had been found in a water retention basin off Harlem after a missing person alert. "I know that doesn't mean anything," she said. "People die. Things happen. But I keep thinking about how the sound moved, how it checked the edges of us." We stood there with our solo cups and didn't say what we were thinking out loud, that the old story about the scream being a harbinger, a banshee, might be less folklore and more function, not a ghost warning families of a death like in Irish tales, but the place itself taking inventory. You know when you're counting in your head and you hum a little to keep the numbers straight? That's what the scream felt like suddenly. In hindsight, the grove keeping count. I don't have a moral or a tidy ending. That's the part that keeps me up some nights. There's no lesson that saves anybody. If I had to give you anything concrete, it's this. 2 weeks ago, I updated my phone and a few old files reappeared from the cloud. One was a voice memo I didn't title from a fall night years ago. I listened to it in my kitchen with the window open and the city coming through in distant sirens and a neighbor's music and the dull throb of the highway. I heard the pines. I heard us. I heard the scream rise and fall and then the kettle sound. The underhum that shapes itself like language. And right at the end, after the last cutoff, when silence makes that soft pillow around itself, I heard one more thing. A whispered notch of air right next to the mic. A little intake like someone about to say a name. It wasn't my name. It wasn't anyone's I knew. But I felt it press against my ear in the way a cold glass does, as if it had been set down beside me. When the file ended, the apartment made a little settling sound like a person shifting in bed. If you go to Bachelor's Grove, and you will because the dare survives, bring a real flashlight in a second, and don't pick up anything you didn't bring. Don't speak your friends' names when you hear the trees answer because names have a way of sticking to things. And if, when you reach the road again, the scream stops like a switch flipped, don't turn around to see what it was. That isn't the ending you think it is. The ending isn't the road. The ending is how far the sound can carry afterward, and how many places the city has that can pass for pines when the wind is right. I used to think Sleepy Hollow was just a postcard town with a famous name. The first time I went there, it felt like a movie set. Somebody forgot to strike. White church steeple, tidy Dutch houses, pumpkins on stone steps, leaves crackling under every footstep. I drove up with my friend Hannah because she teaches American Lit and wanted to leave a penny on Washington Irving's grave. Our other friend Mark came along because he's a camera guy and never turns down a chance to shoot. Fall foliage. It was one of those bright October days when the sky looks washed and thin around the sun. We spent the afternoon doing the wholesome stuff. Coffee in Terrytown, a museum, a walk by the river, while Mark took pictures of a bridge that looks like a row of bones. When we finally turned into the cemetery, It was that hour when everything is both glowing and getting dark. The stones throw long shadows, the grass shines, and your breath starts to show when you talk. There was a little sign about closing time on the way in, and a groundskeeper raking under an ash tree who called out that the gates shut at 6. I asked if it was strict, and he shrugged like it wasn't his problem if we got stuck. He had a New York accent softened by years outdoors and told us to keep an eye on the west gate because the latch sticks. Then he went back to raking the same patch of leaves in patient, quiet circles. He looked like he could do it forever. We promised we'd be quick and followed the path up toward Irving's plot with its low iron fence and neat headstone. A few people were there already, a couple in knitted hats reading the epitaph out loud like a poem, 2 teenage girls creeping a few feet from a mausoleum to take photos, and a tour group on their way down, led by a woman with a lantern she didn't need yet. Hannah put a penny on the stone and, because she can't help herself, started telling us trivia she gives her students. I let her talk and let the place work on me. The quiet in that cemetery has a shape. It feels heavier around the big family vaults and lighter where the older stones tilt in their rows like crooked teeth. When the wind came through, it carried a metallic smell I couldn't place at first, but later realized was just cold iron. I was thinking about that when something hit the iron gate at the edge of the lane. It wasn't loud, just a dull metal-on-metal knock that the air swallowed. Mark glanced over his shoulder. The gate was swaying a little even though the leaves on the trees were still. Knock. Another one. "It's wind," I said. "Or the latch. It stopped when we looked at it. The way a fridge stops humming when you open the door." We drifted from Irving's grave deeper into the older section where the family vaults sit half into the hill like sideways houses. You can tell who had money, because their names are cast in iron above the doors, each with a ring knocker big enough to tie a horse to. Most of the rings looked fused by time. A couple were free enough to lift an inch and drop. One of them hung perfectly straight, polished in a way the rest of the vault wasn't. Somebody had carved a little laurel around it, and the groove had collected black grit. I rubbed my thumb along it, and something gritty came away. My thumb smelled like pennies. On our way back toward the main lane, we heard the knock again, but this time it wasn't the gate. It was right next to us from a vault with no obvious way inside. Even Mark, who lives to explain away weirdness, stopped and leaned in. He crouched and put his ear near the seam of the stone door like he could hear through it. The teens a few. Graves over went quiet to listen too. The sound that came was embarrassingly clear, knuckles on thick metal, slow, deliberate. It was exactly the pace of someone with time to spare and a point to make. Hannah was the one who whispered, "Knocking." From inside a sealed vault is air pressure or something. She said it like a teacher trying to tamp down a room. The next knock happened while she was talking, and it made her bite her lip to finish her sentence. I looked for the groundskeeper, but he was gone from the ash tree, rakes leaning in his place. The orange sun had slipped behind a bank of clouds, and the temperature did that sudden drop that makes your shoulders rise. Mark tapped the ring softly. It didn't move. He used 2 fingers and lifted. It held, then slid an inch and fell back against the iron with a polite click. "Don't," someone said behind us. The tour group had turned around at the bottom of the slope. The woman with the lantern had it on now even though there was still light. "Please don't knock," she said. "We're closing soon and we don't need you riling up the imitators." She smiled like it was a joke, but her shoulders were tight. We stood and stepped back, and she came close enough that I could see the shine of sweat on her upper lip. "School kids come up here and do that," she said, nodding at the ring. "All it does is carry sound in weird ways and get the cops called. We're clearing out in a few minutes, enjoy the sunset, and then head down." One of the teens called out that we hadn't touched it, and the guide looked past us at the ring hanging nice and quiet and said, "Good." The tour group clattered off through the leaves. The couple in hats were already halfway down the lane, and a car engine turned over somewhere near the office. We lingered just enough to be the last normal people around, because that's who we are, the ones who want one more photo when the light is right. Mark framed the vault against the sky, and I stepped out of his shot, and that's when I heard my name. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical or warped. It was the way your mother says your name when she knocks on your bedroom door and pushes it open at the same time. I froze and looked at Hannah, who was busy staring at her phone like she was checking the time and texting the same person. I asked if she said my name. She said no, and pointed at the sign about the 6 o'clock closing like that was the only thing she had time to think about. Mark was filming video of the path. I told myself I'd misheard. We started down together but had to pass the western gate the groundskeeper warned about. It's tall and handsome and has a ring knocker the size of my fist. There's a little brass plate at eye level that says the name of a family I hadn't heard of, and dates that stop about a century ago. The latch was half jammed with leaves, and the gate stood a few inches from fully closed, as if it couldn't decide which side to be on. We were still 10 steps away when it knocked. I saw the ring move this time. I saw it rise and let itself fall. Mark said, "Wind," in that bright voice people use when a dog growls and you want it to be friendly. Then it knocked again. The second knock was heavier, like whoever was using the ring was making a point. We stopped. A third knock came that I felt in my teeth. Hannah whispered, "Okay," and took 2 quick steps past it like an athlete who knows not to look at the hurdle while you jump it. I hesitated because my name had been said, and even though I was telling myself I must have heard a stray word, my body had already decided that the ring was a mouth, and the vaults were ears, and the thing to do was not to show your back. The groundskeeper appeared from the direction of the office with a ring of real keys and a battered flashlight. "We're closed," he called, not unkind. "I don't want to lock you in. It's a pain for everyone if you're locked in." We promised we were leaving. The ring on the gate wall knocked a 4th time with a tired, almost apologetic sound. The groundskeeper's face went flat. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. He didn't look at the ring. He looked at me. "Hear me and hear me good," he said like a grandfather scolding a kid. "Whatever you think it is, don't knock back." I laughed because of course I did. The teens behind us laughed too, that twitchy relief laugh. The groundskeeper didn't. "I'm serious," he said. "Stop. Go." He held the gate with his shoulder and pushed it the last few inches. The latch didn't catch, but the iron kissed iron with a quiet kiss. We slipped by. When we reached the lane, Mark turned and took one more photo back the way we came, low ISO, long enough that any movement would blur. I kept walking so I wouldn't be in his frame. The sound behind us stepped away with us. It took me a second to understand that the knocking wasn't in one place anymore. It was following us like a friend keeps pace while talking. Light on. The left, heavy on the right, light on the left. When I realized that pattern, left, right, left, the hair on my arms rose. I wanted to pretend it was just my footsteps echoing off iron, but my feet were in leaves and the knocks didn't line up. We reached the office where the paved road widens. The woman with the lantern stood by an SUV, talking to a man in a reflective vest who had keys bigger than the groundskeeper's. She glanced at us and said, "See you," a little too brightly, like seeing us meant we were accounted for. The man raised the keys to his face as though they were binoculars and asked if we were good. We were good. The western gate knocked again, full-bodied this time, as if someone had a funnier sense of timing than we did. The man with the keys glanced uphill, frowned, and muttered something about steel cooling. He told us to have a nice night, which is how authority dismisses anxiety from strangers. We walked to the car. "Did you hear that voice say your name?" Mark asked when we were inside. His voice had the fake casual note people add when they're not sure if they'll spook you or get laughed at. I said yes. Hannah, who had been trying to be the rational one, said she just wanted to be off cemetery grounds before her teacher brain turned this into a story she would regret telling students. I put the car in gear and the headlights cut across the office windows and caught our faces in reflection. Pale, a little cracked from the shape of the glass, everyone trying on a smile to check if it fit. As we pulled out, the radio made a little white noise cough the way radios do when your phone gets near the dash. The static came in 3 pops. It was nothing. It felt like a pattern. We went to dinner at a place with candles. If there's a cure for spooky feelings, it's warm food and background conversation. By the time dessert came, I had convinced myself it was a prank, that the groundskeeper or the tour guide had a kid with a stick hid behind the wall to keep tourists talking. We ordered one more drink to prove we were normal city people and not the type to bring bad luck home. The three of us walked back toward the car around 9 with everyone else who was too full and too happy, and that should have been the end. We wouldn't have remembered it the way we do if we hadn't passed the cemetery on the drive back to the highway. They keep the big road separated from the graves by a tall iron fence. The moon had come up thin and the tall fence cut it into strips. Right before the turn, a shadow moved between two stone pillars like someone stepping from one lane to the next. It was only there long enough to make me breathe in, and then it was gone. Anybody with it. The radio coughed the same 3 pops. I glanced at my phone on the center console. It had turned itself to the voice memo app. That's not how my phone works. Even if I butt dial apps, it doesn't open that quickly. The screen showed a new recording titled, New Memo 6:02 p.m. That was when we were between the vaults and the gate. A red bar said, Earl 6. I pressed play before I could decide not to. 3 knocks came through the speakers. If I'd had to swear under oath, I would have said they were the same 3 knocks from earlier. Then there was something else, quiet and breathy. If you already believed it, you could maybe hear my name. It could also have been wind traveling through the car's mic. We listened to it twice and then deleted it because I didn't want that kind of proof in my pocket. Back in the city, we split up on the sidewalk outside my building while the streetlights hummed. Hannah took the train. Mark biked, because of course he did. I went upstairs and did the rituals you do when you're trying not to think: dishes, shower, clothes laid out for the next day. When I finally turned the lights off, the radiator clicked the way old pipes do as they figure themselves out for the night. The clicking resolved into a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't loud. It was just enough like a human knocking, to feel like I'd invited the wrong thing home by paying attention. I'd tell you I slept if that would make me sound tougher. I didn't. At 3:17 a.m., someone knocked on my door in 3 slow, clear knocks. I watched the door from the couch where I'd fallen asleep with the TV on low. I watched the brass peephole like it was an eye. I didn't get up right away because I wanted to be sure I heard what I heard. The knocks didn't repeat. The peephole showed the same empty hallway I've stared at 100 times. Fire door painted beige, exit sign humming, neighbor's wreath crooked. I opened the door anyway because I'm that kind of idiot and because you can't sleep with a question in the room. The hall was empty. The neighbor's wreath smelled like cinnamon. There was a smudge on my door below the peephole like someone had leaned their forehead there. It was the color of old nails. The next day was normal because the world doesn't arrange itself around your experience. Nobody at work cares that your radiator knocked like a hand. I sold coffee and typed emails and ate a salad. At lunch, I texted Hannah and Mark to ask if they were haunted too. Hannah sent back 3 eye-roll emojis and said she was fine. Mark said his bike chain had slipped twice on the ride home and that he'd heard a weird noise in his stairwell, but that's just city life. I told them about the late-night knock and immediately regretted telling them because saying it reduces it to something exchangeable and small. After work, I got on the train and let myself be carried. Then I did what people do. I tried to reassert logic by buying something. I bought a new doormat. I told myself old mats hold smells, and smells bring raccoons and teenagers and every other explanation besides the one I didn't want. That evening, Hannah called to say she'd told her class a sanitized version of the story as a Halloween warm-up, and one of her students who grew up in Terrytown told her a thing I wish she had kept to herself. The student said if you hear the gate ring knock 3 times like it's asking a question, don't answer. Don't knock back. If you answer, it knows your hands. If it knows your hands, it can borrow them. I laughed because I had already decided that anything that sounded like mythology would steady me. It had the opposite effect. Part of me wanted to prove how unspooked I was by going to the hall and knocking on my own door. That part of me didn't do it because the better part said she didn't want to be the person who reenacts a ritual without knowing its steps. I didn't go back to Sleepy Hollow that week. We weren't those kids who chase the thrill until it bites. We had jobs and rent. Still, Mark texted on Friday to ask if we'd look over the shots he took. We met at his place where he had a decent monitor and better beer. He laid the photos out and we went through them, and for a while it was just image talk, exposure, balance, straightening a horizon. Then we hit the 3 continuous frames he took when we passed the western gate. In the first, the ring hung straight. In the second, the ring was up and away from the door, as if someone off camera was lifting it. In the third, the ring hung crooked. That wouldn't be noteworthy if Mark hadn't shot those 3 frames on a tripod that wasn't there, in light too low for that crispness. At shutter speeds that can turn humans into mist, the ring was the only sharp motion. He zoomed in until the pixels looked like bricks and we stared at the shape the ring made at the top of its movement. I could make out what looked like a shallow notch along the edge of the ring, where a hand would pinch if a hand were cold and thin. We didn't talk for a minute. Then we all started talking at once about magnets, about the way iron cools, about pranks. I was happy to talk about magnets. I wanted to build a city of magnets around what I saw. Mark kept switching between photos, zooming in and out, as if another detail might present itself and repeal the first one. In the corner of the second frame, a shadow sat across a piece of stone in a shape I struggled not to name. It wasn't crisp enough to be a person. It was the suggestion of a person leaned the way bored people lean when they've been knocking and you won't answer. Mark closed the folder and said lightly that he was going to trash the sequence because he didn't want people online telling him he faked it. We told him to send it to us first and he said sure and then didn't. The following Sunday, I went back alone. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to explain my reasons, which were not good reasons. I told myself I was going to leave the penny I hadn't left on Irving's grave the first time, because I'd been too busy having a feeling. I told myself this was symmetry, an offering to balance the air. The groundskeeper wasn't at the ash tree. The lantern guide wasn't there either. The office was closed. A group of kids were making a video with a fake skull and a selfie stick, and I backed away before they could put me in it. The light was the same thin gold as before. Over the hill toward the river, a bell rang the hour, and the sound draped itself over the stones. I walked the way we had, trackable by the dents we left in my memory. Irving's grave, the vault with the polished ring, the west gate. At the west gate, I made myself stand still. Not everything happens twice, I set out, loud to the empty path like that meant something. The ring didn't move. I left the penny on the hinge because it felt like leaving a small coin for a toll you hope not to pay. I took 1 step past. The ring rose a 1/4 inch. It fell without a sound because I think the air ran out of it. Then it did it again, quicker and harder, with a sound that traveled through the iron into the bones of the stone pillar and then into my shoes. Knock, knock, knock. I know what I promised I wouldn't do, and I know what the groundskeeper told me, and I did it anyway because the combination of curiosity and fear makes a logic of its own. I lifted my hand and knocked back once on the pillar, not even on the ring, a solid rap with my knuckles. The metal was colder than the air. A wash of breath hit my face that smelled like damp stone and something older than the idea of buildings. I don't mean that poetically. It had a scent like water sat in a dark place and learned a language. From behind the door came 3 knocks, in tight sequence like somebody laughing. I took a step back. The ring knocked low, 1 heavy thud with impatience in it, and I ran. I didn't stop at the lane. I didn't stop at the office or the parking area. I didn't look at the river or the church. I ran like the ground behind me was a lid being put back on something. Back home, there was iron under my nails even though I hadn't touched the ring. I scrubbed my hands and a splinter of something dark came out of a knuckle like a thorn. I put it on a white napkin, and it left a rust halo. I pressed my fingers against the table and felt bruised. When I held my phone, my grip left half moons. I waited for night the way you wait for an apology you know you won't get. It came, and with it the radiator's clicks and pops composing themselves into patience. I didn't sleep. At 3:17, the same 3 knocks as before came on the door, and I said, "I'm not opening," out loud, even though it would have made exactly 0 difference. My name came from the seam where the door meets the jamb, not a whoosh or a wail or a monster. My name in the voice of someone whose life overlapped mine for years in ways that never got written down. Whatever voice you can't ignore, that one. The next morning, I returned the doormat and bought a small iron bell from a thrift store like that would be medicine. I hung the bell from the inside knob. That night, I woke to its soft chime with no wind in the apartment. I threw it out the window. Later, a neighbor texted the building group chat asking if anyone heard someone knocking on the third-floor stairwell door every night around 3 a.m., and would they please stop. Several people chimed in with jokes about ghosts. The super replied that maybe the pipes were knocking, not the door. A woman in 3B said her toddler was waking up at the same time, pointing at the ceiling, laughing. I muted the thread because it made everything feel communal, and this didn't. It felt aimed. People asked me what I did with the splinter. I put it in a plastic bag and then moved it to a jar because the bag felt disrespectful in a way that made no sense. A week later, the jar smelled like a coin I'd sucked on. I looked up the family name on the brass plate by the west gate and found just enough information to confirm a lineage that stopped when the money did. A blacksmith, in T, the 1800s, showed up twice in old newspaper scans as the person hired to make fittings for that cemetery, and two others. The blacksmith's great-granddaughter married into the family on the plate, then died young. None of this connects to me. That's the part that makes my skin feel thin. We want stories to be attached to bloodlines and choices. It would be easier if my name matched a name on a stone, if I could blame a story. As far as I can tell, I'm nobody to them. I was just there late and answered when I shouldn't have. I haven't gone back since the second time. I don't think going would solve anything. The knocks didn't stop. Sometimes I don't hear them for a few nights and start to relax, and then I'll be washing dishes or waking from a shallow dream, and there it is. 3 small sounds placed with care, enough space between them for you to say no and mean it. I don't reply. I don't put my hand on the door. I keep iron out of my apartment like that matters. The splinter is still in the jar, and some days the rust halo around it looks heavier, as if the little thing is making more of itself by breathing. My air. Hannah tells me to write it down and then it will be done, like stories are nets you throw over feelings. Mark won't talk about it at all. He's changed the subject every time Sleepy Hollow comes up, and I noticed he sold his heavy tripod, and now uses a little carbon thing that shakes in wind. Maybe he wants things to blur. I can tell you it isn't constant, and maybe that's the worst part. If it were constant, you could live inside that rule and forget how anything else feels. The knocks come when I'm about to feel normal again. They come when the building is quiet and you've reminded yourself that buildings all make noise. When your body lowers its shoulders and says, okay. They come with that patient rhythm, like a person with all the time in the world, like a person who lived in a sealed room and learned patience one breath at a time. They come during rain when the pipes sweat, and during dry spells when you can hear dust drift. They don't care about weather. They care about attention. When I walk by a churchyard now, any churchyard, I can tell you which stones hold themselves differently in the air. You wouldn't notice unless you stood still long enough. When I pass iron gates, I keep my hands in my pockets. If someone is with me and they touch the metal, I feel my stomach pull the way it does before a fall. I don't tell people what to do. I don't tell them the full version because if I admit what I think is happening, then I have to admit what I did. I answered. A thing knocked and I knocked back. The details will differ depending on who tells it. Someone will say it was all teenagers and wind and a lantern guide with a sense of humor. Someone will say it was stress. Someone will say it followed me because I stayed and listened instead of letting the last light go where it was going. All I can do is be precise. 3 knocks, my name, the smell of iron, a breath out of a seam where there shouldn't be breath. If you go during the day and leave your offerings and take your photos and be kind to the grounds. Listen to the yo bell and walk out when you hear the first car start in the lot. Don't test the rings. If they knock, don't answer. It's not about danger in the shape you expect. No one's going to run at you or pull you under. What it wants is smaller and more permanent. It wants your part in the conversation that keeps a place alive. If you answer, you're in it, like a name carved in iron that does not rust because the finger keeps passing over it. I miss a time before I knew this could be true. I miss not knowing there are doors that are more than doors. Now, when the radiator clicks at night and the hallway stays empty through the peephole, I lie on the couch with my hands under a blanket so I won't make a mistake in my sleep. I count the seconds between the sounds because knowing the pattern feels like control. Sometimes I get bold or tired, or both, and I stand by the door and breathe, and for a long moment the apartment is still, and I think the thing has given up, or gone. I almost believe it until the quiet turns into attention. The first knock is so soft I could pretend it's pipes. The second leaves a taste of iron in my mouth. The third is a question I don't want to hear, gently asked, as if I'm the one holding the key. I know people roll their eyes when they hear about Resurrection Mary. It's one of those stories every cabbie, bartender, and bored cousin tells a little differently after a couple beers. I did too, until last January, when it was too cold for any sane person to be walking, and I saw a girl on Archer Avenue in a white dress with bare feet. I was coming back from a late shift on the southwest side, wipers squeaking and road salt making the windshield look like frosted glass. She hugged her arms around herself like she was trying to hold the heat in, hair stuck to her cheek, head down against the wind. I slowed without thinking and cracked my window enough to ask if she needed help. She turned her face, eyes wide, and kind of hopeful in a way that made my chest feel tight, and then she wasn't there. No step back into the darkness, no run to the ditch, just gone. The air inside my car turned so cold it hurt to breathe, and for a second a film of frost bloomed on the inside of the windshield, a soft oval like someone had just breathed on the glass from the passenger side. I didn't tell anyone that night. I went home, parked badly, and sat in the car with my hands on the wheel until my fingers stopped shaking. My apartment heat felt wrong after that kind of cold. I left the TV on and tried to sleep with a hoodie over my face because the corners of my room felt too sharp and too bright. Like if I looked long enough, there would be somebody standing there with wet feet on my rug. The next morning I gave in and told my cousin Danny. She's 3 years younger than me and has the kind of face that makes old men at diners tell her their whole life story. She listened without interrupting, stirring her coffee around in circles like she expected the cream to spell something. "So you finally saw her," she said, matter of fact. "My friend Marco's older brother swears she got in his car once, sat there like a real person, asked to go to the ballroom." "The ballroom burned down," I said. "Not then. This was ages ago." She took a sip and made a face. "Archer tap later. We'll ask Eddie. He hears everything." I told her I didn't want to turn my scare into a bar story, but by 4 o'clock I was texting her anyway. There's something about being alone with a thing like that. You need other voices to push against it. Eddie had the kind of belly that advertised how long he'd been behind the bar. "You know how many Lyft drivers talk about that stretch?" he said, drying a pint glass with a towel that was probably more grease than fabric at this point. "Girl in a white dress, barefoot, smells like flowers sometimes, like soap. Gets in the car and disappears by the cemetery gate, leaves the seat wet, or leaves a handprint on the inside of the window. Only thing is, it's always winter, and she never looks at the driver too long, like she knows better. Smells like flowers," Danny repeated. "Lilacs," Eddie said, then looked slightly embarrassed that he'd been that specific. "I don't know flowers, that's just what people say." "You get names?" I asked. "Like actual names of drivers? Anybody who talked to me?" Eddie scratched under his cap and looked down the bar. "Nash is in sometimes. Drives nights. Says he won't take Archer anymore after one picked the lock on his back door." That's what he said. Picked the lock. Which is dumb because why would a ghost need to do that? Anyway, he's around Tuesdays. It wasn't Tuesday, so we nursed 2 beers and watched the Bulls lose by 8. When we walked out, the air had that heavy, lake-wet feel. Temperature already dropping. A plow rolled past with a slow metallic roar. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to hear the radiator clank and then go quiet and feel that pocket of cold in my living room again. "Drive me by the cemetery," I said, and I heard how bad it sounded as soon as it left my mouth. Danny grinned like I'd given her an early birthday present. "Marco's at his mom's until 9. We've got time." We took Archer west. The orange glow of the sodium lights made every snowbank look dirty. Any time a car pulled out from a side street, I flinched. The sign for Resurrection Cemetery loomed up on the right, cast iron and old stone and that deep old money sense of Catholic permanence. The gates were chained for the night, Snow made little hats on the tops of each fence post. We didn't see anything except our own dumb faces reflected in the glass and a few wreaths leaning soggy against the wall. But when I turned the heat down for a second, I could smell something clean and sweet. Not perfume exactly, more like a bar of soap in a linen closet. "You smell that?" I asked. "Mm-hmm," she said, quiet now, clutching her scarf up to her mouth. "Lilacs," I said, only because Eddie had put the word in my head. "There aren't any," she said. "It's January." We parked a little farther down near a fire hydrant and got out. My boots crunched. Danny's breath came out in long white streamers. Through the bars I could see rows of stones like hunched shoulders. There was a burned black scar on one of the gate bars about shoulder high. I'd heard about that. People say her hands melted the iron once, that they had to replace the gates, that the marks returned anyway. Just stories, I told myself. But I still kept my hands in my pockets because you don't touch something like that on purpose. "Hey," a voice said behind us, and I turned too fast, stupidly ready. Key between my fingers like that would do anything. A man in a thick jacket and a Carhartt hat stood by a pickup. His face was young but weathered, like Chicago wind had sanded the boyishness off. "You can't be here," he said, not unkindly. "Gates are closed." "Sorry," I said. I didn't know how to say it without sounding like a child. "I saw someone last night." He studied me a second, then flicked his eyes to Danny and back. "You saw a lot of someone's last night, probably," he said. "But I know who you mean." He stuck his hand out. "Kowalski. I help with the ground sometimes." "Is the handprint thing real?" Danny asked. He looked past us at the gate like he wanted to argue with it. "Real enough for me not to sleep right after certain nights," he said. "Go on home, okay? She's got enough people bothering her when it snows. Get where you're going before the plows box in your car." He waited until we got back in before he started his truck. We watched his taillights disappear toward Justice. Danny had that look she gets when she's matching puzzle pieces. "He didn't ask who we meant," she said. "Everybody knows who we meant," I said, even though I didn't know if that was true or just felt true in that moment. I dreamed that night about the ballroom, not how it actually looked in pictures, but how the word felt. Ballroom. High ceiling, gold trim, a floor waxed to a shine that reflected shoes and light like water. I dreamed of a girl who waited by the coat check with her hands cupped as if she were holding something, and when I asked what it was, she opened them, and there was only cold, like she'd pocketed a handful of January and brought it inside. Tuesday we found Nash. He was hunched at the far end of the bar with a cranberry juice and a face like he'd stopped arguing with the world and was just letting it step on him. When Eddie pointed us his way, he sighed like he'd already known it was coming. "I don't go out there anymore," he said, without us asking anything. "Not at night. Not for Surge, not for Triple Surge. I'll take Cicero, I'll take Harlem, but not Archer past the tracks." "What happened?" Danny said gently. "The back door locks don't lock like they used to," he said. "I know that's not a thing. I know locks don't get tired. But I could feel the latch set. I could feel it click. A block later I heard it and I knew it was my own lock. That little tick noise. And she was sitting there. I saw her dress. It wasn't white, not like wedding white, more like yellowed, like it used to be white. The hem was dirty. She had bare feet and the bottoms were gray. She asked for the ballroom. "And you took her," I said, already knowing the answer. He looked at the bar, not at us. "I took her as far as I could, which is the parking lot chain." She looked at me in the mirror to say thank you, and her breath made flowers on the glass. That's the only way I can explain it. Like pressed leaf shapes, I blinked and they were gone. He pushed his cranberry around in a circle, leaving a ring. "People talk about how she disappears. No one talks about how your car feels afterward. I drove for 4 more hours and never warmed up." He didn't want to say more. We didn't push, but he left something on the bar when he went to the bathroom, and it was only later I realized he'd meant to do it. It was a yellow ticket stub, soft at the edges like it had lived in a wallet too long. Willowbrook stamped on one side, a date from the 30s on the other in purple ink. Danny slipped it into her pocket and gave me a look that said we were past pretending not to be involved. People think they want to see a ghost until they get as close as we did and feel that cold reach for the tender parts of their life. Nothing was dramatic at first. It was small things. My radio started drifting to AM on its own, a warbly big band sound slipping under whatever I was playing. I'd turn the dial and it would be gone like I'd dreamed it. Sometimes I'd get in the car after work and the passenger seat heater would be on, little orange light glowing like an eye. Danny said she could smell that soap smell in my coat. Marco started making jokes about me having a secret girlfriend named Mary until the night he came over and his breath turned white in my kitchen for a second, like his mouth had dipped into a pocket of January. We went out to Archer again, not to taunt or test anything, at least that's what I told myself. Danny said we should bring flowers, so we brought a cheap bouquet from the grocery store, the kind with cellophane that crackled too loud in the quiet. The gate was closed. We slid the bouquet through the bars anyway, and it made a small sound when it hit the snow. I don't know what we expected. Some little moment like on a ghost show when they play the slowed down voice, but all we got was the sound of a train in the distance and the way the chain on the gates creaked a little where the wind found it. The way back, a car behind us flashed its brights 3 times and then turned down a side street. That was weird, Danny said. Kids, I said, because that's what you say about anything you don't want to carry with you. We were almost to Harlem when the heat died. Not like the dial moved, just like somebody closed a door on the engines. Warmth. My fingers hurt. I reached to touch the vents and they were blowing out air that smelled like old stone. The windshield fogged from the inside, thick and fast, and then I watched, not breathing, as a shape formed on the passenger side. Not a handprint. A curve. Then another, like someone exhaled slowly and carefully as if trying to write. I didn't understand it. It didn't look like letters. It looked like a chain link, the oval of it, and then another oval below it. Do you see that? I asked. Danny said nothing. She took her scarf off and pressed it to the glass, like she could blot whatever message it was out of being. When she pulled the scarf back, one long hair stuck to the window, pale and almost colorless, like a hair you'd find in bathwater. The vents coughed. Warmth rushed back so sudden it hurt. The fog vanished and with it the hair. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next either. I went to work and came home and ate standing up and sat on my couch with the TV off, listening to the radiators hiss and making deals in my head with a girl who might never have been a person and yet felt more like one every time I said her name in my mind. If I drive you, I thought, will you stop coming into my car without asking? If I take you as far as the chain, will you let my cousin go? I didn't say any of this out loud. I barely said hello to the cashier at the corner store. I was afraid the words would line up just right and open something. On Friday, Marco urged us to go to a house party in Bridgeport to reset our brains, which is the kind of thing Marco says when he wants to be helpful. We went. We lasted an hour. Every song sounded too bright, like the edges of it were cutting something. I found myself in the kitchen staring at a refrigerator magnet shaped like a shamrock and thinking about the way the gate chain had looked in the snow. Danny tugged my sleeve. "Let's just go," she said, and I didn't argue. I don't know why I turned on to Archer instead of taking 55 like a normal person, except that some nights feel like a choice and some feel like a track you're already on. We were passing the industrial strip where everything looks like it's pretending to be closed even when it's open, and then we were past the tracks and the road went a little darker and quieter, and the orange lights seemed farther apart. There was a girl walking on the shoulder, bare legs, dress at calf length, hem dingy. Her hair looked damp, like she'd just come in from snow that hadn't started yet. She didn't look up when we slowed. She didn't stick her thumb out. She just kept walking as if the destination were exactly 2 feet in front of her forever. "Don't," Danny said. "I have to," I said, and I believed it the same way I believe in gravity. I rolled down my window halfway. The cold slid in with that closet soap smell. "Do you need a ride?" I asked because I couldn't think of anything else that wasn't a prayer. She turned her head. Her eyes were the kind of blue you only see when the sky tries to be brave, in winter, and fails. "The ballroom," she said, polite and patient like she knew I'd say yes. We unlocked the doors without touching the buttons. I heard the tick, the same tick Nash had described, and then she was in the back seat. She didn't pull the door closed. The door closed by itself. Danny folded her hands so tight I could hear her knuckles. I put the car in gear and started toward the ballroom that is not there anymore. She didn't talk. I'm sure people ask her questions. I didn't. It felt wrong. I kept my eyes on the road and felt the temperature in the car drop and drop like a slow elevator. My breath made clouds. I could see Danny's breath too, rising and falling like she was trying not to hyperventilate. In the rear view, the girl was a little blurred, not like a special effect, more like a person sitting behind glass a shade thicker than normal. When we turned into the lot where the ballroom had been, the chain was across the entrance. 2 locks, a little flutter of police, tape that had somehow survived wind and time. The girl leaned a little toward the center, not enough to startle me, just enough that I could hear her exhale. The mirror fogged in that same oval, soft-edged and careful. I thought of someone practicing a signature and never quite getting it right. "I can't take you in," I said uselessly. "I can only take you this far." "I know," she said, and there was no resentment in it, no sadness, just a fact. She opened the back door and stepped out. Her bare feet made no sound on the pavement. She took 3 steps toward the chain and stopped. For a second, I thought she was going to try to climb, and I felt a panic I didn't understand. Don't touch it, don't burn yourself, like I knew what would happen, like I'd seen her do it before from some other seat in some other winter. She turned back toward us and lifted her hand in a tiny wave. I lifted mine. The door swung shut, though nothing touched it. The weight in the car changed in a way my mind couldn't find a word for. And then she wasn't there. We sat there until a squad car rolled up behind us and a flashlight tapped my mirror. "You okay?" the officer asked when I rolled my window down. He saw the color of our faces and his tone shifted. "You're not the first tonight," he said. "Don't park here. People hit black ice at the turn and it becomes a mess. Dough." "You get a lot of calls?" I asked. "In waves," he said. "Always in waves. Go home." He hesitated. "Turn your heat up higher than you think you need. It helps." He tapped the roof with his knuckles and walked back to his car like a man walking away from a sleeping dog. The heat didn't fix the cold in my bones. It took 2 showers and 3 hours under blankets to stop my jaw from chattering. I dreamed of the chain links again, each oval a mouth opening to breathe. When I woke, Danny had texted me a picture of her bathroom mirror. There was a faint oval in the steam, like someone had leaned in to look at herself and then changed her mind. It didn't stop. It never peaked and then faded like a bad flu. It settled into our days in quieter ways. I'd get in the car, and the radio would be on a station that plays songs older than my grandparents. Danny found a little smear of gray dust on her floor by the door, and when she wiped it up with a tissue, it smelled like old stone and wax. Marco changed how he joked about it. He started leaving earlier when he came over, like he didn't want to be in our orbit after dark. Around noon one Sunday, when the sky was a hard white and the wind had that knife edge, I went back to the cemetery alone, because there are some things you can only do by yourself. The gate was open for visitors. Inside it was brighter somehow, the snow more honest under the sun. People had left little battery candles on some stones, flickers of cheap light in the daytime. I didn't know where to go, what name to find, and the idea of asking made my throat tighten. I walked without plan and let the rows of markers lead me. I stopped when I saw a stone that had a girl's name that started with M and a date that fit what people say in the stories. But there were so many names like that, so many years that could be hers. I set a white grocery store carnation at that stone anyway. It looked small there, silly, like I'd brought a plastic spoon to a funeral. A couple about my parents' age were walking 2 stones over, speaking Polish so soft it sounded like wind. The woman caught my eye and gave me the kind of kind smile that makes you feel seen. "You look for someone?" she asked, accent thick but words clear. "I don't know who," I said, and it came out like a confession. "I just wanted to say I was sorry." "For who?" she asked. "For driving her part way," I said. Her husband's gaze flicked to the gate and back. He said something to his wife that I couldn't catch. She nodded. To me, she said, It is good to say sorry. It is good to be careful. Sometimes careful is sorry. She patted my arm. They went on, holding hands in a way that made me think of the ballroom and the way people used to dance even though an ice storm could be howling outside. When I got back to my car, there was something tucked under the wiper. I thought it would be a flyer or a ticket, but it was a paper square, thick and stiff like the kind of paper you don't see anymore. A dance card, the front set in gold, script like a joke a wedding DJ would make now. The inside had lines and the words waltz, foxtrot, polka. Next to polka, someone had written Mary in a hand that looked like mine if I were trying to write carefully after my fingers had gone numb. I checked around me like I'd catch some teenager giggling behind a tree with a camera. There was no one. The wind lifted the corner of the card and flipped it shut. I brought it home and put it in the drawer where I keep my passport and my social security card, pieces of paper that say who I am and where I'm allowed to be. Every so often I take it out and look at the name to remind myself I didn't make any of this up. It smells like linen and a whisper of something sweeter. We tried not to talk about her for a while. It helped. Or maybe it just let her put her head down and keep walking that shoulder without the weight of us looking. Months went by. The city did that spring thing where it pretends to be warm and then chews your ears off with wind again just when you take your hat out of your bag. I told myself we were done. I took Harlem more. I got lazy about locking my car at night. But then, last week, something shifted again, and I don't know why. Maybe the air pressure changed. Maybe somebody new told the story on a podcast and said her name one too many times. I was leaving my building and heard a knock from inside the car before I hit the unlock button. Not like metal settling, like a knuckle on glass. Twice. When I got in, the passenger seatbelt was buckled. I unbuckled it with fingers that fumbled and then laughed out loud at myself like that would make it less strange. And I drove to work with my heart kicking my ribs like it was trying to get out, and run behind someone on the shoulder. At a yellow light on Cicero, my radio bled into that old crackle again. A clarinet or a trumpet, I can't tell instruments apart. Just a bright little run of notes like someone practicing in a room 2 doors down. Over it came the softest sound, almost swallowed by static, a woman's voice humming just behind the melody like she'd always known it but hadn't had a reason to sing it in a while. It lasted the length of a breath and then it was gone. The light turned green. The guy behind me honked like it was his job to keep time for all of us, and maybe it is. That night I dreamed of walking past the cemetery again, but this time I was on the outside of the gate and she was on the inside. She didn't look sad. That's the part that shook me more than anything else. She didn't look happy either. She looked like a person in line who knows the rules better than the people around her. When she reached the chain, she didn't touch it. She just breathed on it and the link shivered like something alive. In the dream, I understood something I can't hold on to now that I'm awake. Not the story everybody says, not the detail of a crash or a dress, but the spine of it, the shape of waiting. I won't tell you not to stop if you see her. Some people are built to stop. Their first instinct is to open their door, and sometimes I think the world survives because of them. I won't tell you to keep driving either. I will tell you to turn your heat up higher than you think you need. I'll tell you the cold doesn't care that you're a good person. I'll tell you to pay attention to your mirrors, because sometimes the thing you're looking for is already with you. If you see breath on the inside of your windshield, try not to wipe it away right away. Let it sit there for a second, long enough to see if the shape of it makes sense. You won't see letters. That's not how this works. You might see a curve that looks like a link. You might smell soap in a season when flowers are plastic and come wrapped in noisy cellophane. Sometimes on Archer, just past the tracks, you'll catch a pale shape in your peripheral vision. You'll blink, and it will be gone. You'll swear it was only your own face in the glass. You'll turn up your radio and your car will decide she wants another station. You'll feel silly talking about it. That's fine. Say nothing. Drive safe. Keep the passenger seat clear. I can tell myself all the sensible things. I can tell myself it was stress, or suggestion, or the way wind hits that stretch of road, after midnight. I can say it's an old story that collects details like a snowball collects bits of gravel and cigarette butts, and then we call those details evidence. On good days, I believe that. On nights when the sky lowers and the streetlights buzz and my breath hangs in the air of my apartment like it's auditioning for January, I believe something else. I was a person in a warm car who slowed without thinking for someone who looked cold. I opened my mouth to ask if she needed help, and I invited winter in. She's still out there, polite as a memory, walking a road that doesn't lead where roads ought to lead. And if you're unlucky, or soft-hearted, or both, you'll see her. You'll open your window. You'll watch frost bloom from the inside. Out, a breath that doesn't belong to you. Maybe you'll drive her as far as the chain. Maybe you'll say sorry. Maybe you'll go home and turn your thermostat higher than it needs to be, and still sleep in a hoodie with the hood up. It's been months, and I still find myself glancing at the passenger side mirror at night, half expecting to see the pale line of her dress the way you sometimes see the ghost of a car in the lane next to you after it's already turned off. I tell myself I'm looking for headlights. I tell myself I'm being careful. In the grocery store parking lot, when my car is empty and locked, sometimes there's a faint oval breath on the inside of the glass when I come back with milk, and I stick my fingers under my armpits to keep from touching it, because I know better now. I let it fade on its own like fog on the lake when the sun finally finds enough strength to lift it. If you don't believe me, that's okay. I didn't believe me either, but if you ever drive that stretch after midnight and the air in your car feels wrong for a second, like you've opened a door you shouldn't have, don't panic. Turn the heat up. Keep your eyes on the road. If you hear a trumpet, don't. Switch the station right away. And if a girl in a pale dress steps off the shoulder and into your headlights without leaving footprints, be polite. She usually is. Take her as far as you can. Don't touch the chain. Let her go before she tries. Then go home and sit in the dark and put your hand near your own mouth and see if you can convince yourself the next breath belongs to you. I wasn't trying to be creepy that night. I was just trying to get across town before the storm washed the streets clean. Memphis does that thing where the sky goes the color of dishwater right before it lets loose, and every puddle looks like it's hiding a hole big enough to swallow a tire. It was a Tuesday, sometime around 8. I'd stayed late at the auto parts store because a guy came in at the last minute, needing a serpentine belt for a Ford that didn't exist in the computer under any trim level he swore it had. By the time I locked up, the west side of the sky was lit in slow flickers. Cutting through Elmwood would shave 5 minutes, and I'd done it before. The lanes are narrow, and the speed limit is a suggestion written in polite voice, but it's still a public road. And if you keep your lights on low and your mouth shut, no one bothers you. If you've never been, Elmwood isn't the horror movie, kind of cemetery with cartoon bats and fog machines. It's old, like history class old. A place where the trunks of the trees look like they've seen men come home from wars and women wearing clothes no one makes anymore. The stone angels aren't sweet. They look tired, like they've been working too long at a job no one else wants. I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about leftover ribs at home and whether my landlord had finally fixed the flickering kitchen light. I was thinking about Tasha, who had actually meant it this time when she said she was done with me. I had that little buzz you get when you're alone in your car and you can make the radio loud and think about nothing. Then I saw the angel. She stood on a low rise to the right, maybe 15 yards off the lane, wings out but not dramatic, more like someone caught mid-sigh. In the sweep of my headlights, the wings were darker than her face and dress, like water had stained the stone in 2 careful arcs. I don't know why I noticed that. Maybe my brain wanted a small detail to hold so it didn't have to hold the bigger thing that came next. At first I thought it was the rain starting, light static against the windshield. Then I turned down the radio and realized it was coming from outside, not from any direction I could pin down. A child crying, not a wail, not drama. That small, breathy sobbing kids do when they're trying to be brave. I put my hazards on without meaning to, rolled down the window a couple of inches and leaned closer to the gap like the night would meet me halfway. "Hello," I said, too soft for anyone living to hear. "Hey." The crying stopped, not faded, stopped like a switch had been thrown. My chest went hot, then cold, the way it does when you slip on wet tile and catch yourself at the last instant. I reached for the window button and froze because, in the corner of my eye, the angel's head moved, not fell, not cracked, a tilt. The kind a person makes when they're trying to understand a word in a language they almost recognize. Her chin turned maybe an inch. Her gaze settled lower, where my open window was, where my face was. The sound of my own breath was too loud. Somebody honked behind me and I jumped and nearly stalled. There was a burgundy sedan waiting, driver, lifting a hand in that Memphis way that says, "Move it, man," without turning into a fight. I lifted my hand back, rolled the window up, and eased forward. I didn't look directly at the statue when I passed. I did that coward's glance you do, eyes sliding so fast it feels like you can deny you were ever looking at all. I kept my foot light. I told myself the crying was a cat somewhere in the hedges, maybe a fox. I told myself rain plays tricks. I told myself a lot of things on the way home and avoided every mirror in my place until I was in bed with the lamp. On in the morning, the world rinsed itself and pretended to be new. The kitchen light still flickered. I called Tasha and got her voicemail. I listened to my own message afterward and winced at how earnest I sounded. I told myself the cemetery didn't need me to explain it. By noon, I had convinced myself I'd heard a kid at a playground down the block. Easy. Done. I made it almost to lunch before I mentioned it to Marcus at the shop. Marcus is one of those men who makes you feel shorter even if you're the taller one. Not because he's tough, though he is. Because he has that steady look at you he picked up from years of customer complaints and raising twins. I told him about the crying. I left out the angel moving because that part felt like a confession. Elmwood hears a lot, he said, like I'd told him I heard a siren. You probably caught a sound bouncing off those stones. You ever stand in the tunnel over by the river and clap? Echo does weird. Felt like a kid, I said, not an echo. He considered that. There's a children's section. He said it quiet, respectful. Yellow fever days, a lot of little graves, people go and talk to them. Leave toys. My aunt says she won't drive through there when it's raining. He shrugged. But my aunt also says shampoo gives you cancer. It would have been a good place to let the story end. Except it didn't. That night, while I was showering, the pipes banged the way they do when air gets in the line. And under that stutter, I heard it. Soft. Not the water. Not the neighbor's TV. Under the hiss behind the curtain, just the shape of that same small sob. I should have done the normal thing, stepped out dripping and swearing, dripping water all over the bath mat to put my ear against the wall. I didn't. I killed the water and stood in the steam with my hand on the curtain and counted 10. The bathroom fan hummed. My own breath made a little cloud. Nothing. I laughed, the kind of shaky laugh that is as much a warning as a joke, and finished rinsing soap from my hair with the faucet. When I came out, the kitchen light was burned out completely. I ate cereal in the living room with the lamp on, pretending to watch a game I didn't care about. When the rain started up again around midnight, I turned the volume up until I couldn't hear anything but commercials. I stayed awake too late and dreamed I was lost in a mall where the mannequins had wet paper faces. On Thursday, Tasha texted to ask if I still had her spare key. I told her I'd drop it at her sister's. I knew better than to tell her about angels. She listens when she wants to, and this wasn't one of those times. On my way back from her sister's place in Midtown, I took the long route. It wasn't an accident. You can always say the traffic made you turn. You can always tell yourself you're not going somewhere intentionally when the only person in the car who knows you is you. The day was clear. The air felt rinsed. In sunlight, Elmwood looks almost gentle, like a park someone forgot to close. I slowed near the rise where the angel stood. In daylight, the stains on the wings weren't as dark. I could see the face better. The eyes weren't detailed, the mouth was a small line. There was a finger pressed to the lips, which I hadn't noticed at night. Hush, it said, and I hated that I felt I'd been given an instruction. There was a man on a golf cart a little way down the lane, wearing a faded green polo, a name embroidered in white. He waved as if I were a person he'd seen a dozen times and had finally decided to add to his mental map. I pulled over and let him come to me. "You looking for a place?" he asked. His badge said Rupert, though the second O was worn away. "No, sir," I said, and then heard myself say, "I came through the other night and heard a kid crying. It stopped when I stopped. Felt wrong to just keep going." He didn't laugh. He looked past me at the rise, at the angel with the finger to her lips. People hear children, he said. Folks bring toys, folks bring their sadness. Sound catches between stones and trees. Rain carries it different. Nothing in Elmwood surprises me except the living. I thought I saw the head move, I said. The words did not ask my permission. They were out and I couldn't call them back. Rupert's face didn't change. You spend enough time in the weather and everything moves. Trees, stones, fences. Even the hills still moving if you give it the years. He leaned on the wheel. If you hear something again, don't pull off in the lane. There's always some kid driving faster than his brain can. You want to stop, pull over by the office, or keep going. That's what most folks do. I shouldn't stop, I said. Half to him, half to the part of me already planning a night drive. You should do what makes you less stupid, he said, and his tone was kind. It's all any of us manage. He pointed out a turn so I wouldn't end up in a loop of dead ends and waved me on. When I glanced back at the angel, the mouth looked smaller, the finger closer to the lips. I told myself I was borrowing trouble. Lasted until Saturday. That's when Marcus texted to ask if I could swing by his place and help him reseat a toilet that had been rocking itself out of its seal. He bribed me with smoked wings and a game and his twins showing me their new trampoline. By the time we were done and the toilet sat like a throne feeling smug, this guy had that same laundry water look. He offered me the couch if I didn't want to drive in it. I said I'd be fine. I wanted to be alone again in my car with the radio up. That's my worst habit, the one most people don't notice. I like being alone with the thing that scares me a little. It makes me feel like I'm keeping up with myself. I took the cut through on purpose. The first drops were the fat ones that slap the hood like someone flicking pennies at you. The wipers made that rubbery squeak. As I passed the office, the porch light snapped on. A woman in a blue rain jacket stood under it, hands in her pockets, watching the weather, like the storm was a thing she had to greet to keep the place safe. I was the only car in the lane. The angel waited where she waited. I came up slow, like I didn't want to startle my own heartbeat. The crying rose out of the rain fast, like it had been there all along, and the water just revealed it. I eased to a stop at the wide spot before the curve. I wasn't blocking anything. My hazards made a small, warm pulse in the wet air. I cracked the window. The sound was louder this time. It went in and out with the gusts. But it was there, a small voice losing a fight with itself about whether to let it out. I said hey again, and even in the moment I heard how useless it was. I had nothing to offer. I was a man in a car, bringing no one home. For a second I thought the crying was behind me. I leaned to look in the rear view and hissed because a small shape sat in the back seat, darker than the shadows, a suggestion more than a thing. I jerked around with my arm up like I could block something, and the seat was empty, just the cheap upholstery with a stain where a bag of mulch had leaked dirt. Earlier that week, when I looked back through the windshield, the angel's head was tilted lower, not human low, not a neck, the tilt of a stone that has decided to give up a fraction of itself. I should have driven away then. I wish I had. What I did instead was reach for my phone on the passenger seat and thumb the voice recorder. Proof is a thing you think will solve something. I held the phone near the open gap and watched the screen make that dancing green line. The crying was clear enough I could feel it in my teeth. I said, hey again, and that was when the sound changed. It lengthened, the way a sob stretches when the person is too tired to pull it back quick. There was a word in it. Not a full one. A piece. Ma, or maybe no, or maybe a sound a child makes before they have words. Behind the cry, something else ticked, like glass cooling, like stone contracting under rain. A single drop landed on my left hand through the gap and ran down my wrist. It was warm, too warm for rain. The smell that came with it was old flowers, the kind of heavy perfume funeral homes try to be careful with. I rolled the window up and turned off the recorder and put both hands on the wheel because I needed the steering wheel to be a thing in the world I could count on. I drove the curve. I did not go faster than I was supposed to, but I wanted to. The angel fell back into the trees. The crying faded and then was behind me, then nowhere. By the time I hit the light on South Parkway, I was shaking hard enough I pressed my teeth together to keep them from making a sound. I pulled into a gas station and sat there with the engine off and listened to the rain batter the awning. I played the recording. I should not have. I know that now because it made the thing portable. On the phone, the sobbing was thinner than it had been in the car, but it was there, under it, faint, a wet scrape like hands rubbing over stone. I played it, again with the volume low, and that's when I heard the word. Not no, not ma. The smallest possible help, a breath and a consonant and a pleading vowel. Help, the size of a pin. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt like being handed a button from a coat with the look that says you know it goes somewhere and you're supposed to know where. I texted the file to Marcus. He sent back a thumbs up, then a question mark, then "Are you serious?" I said yes. He called. The rain on his end was a rush in the speaker. He told me to come by. He'd make coffee. He didn't say the words "you're being dumb," but he meant the kind version of that. I went. We played the recording at his kitchen table while the twins argued about a cartoon in the other room. His house smelled like onions and laundry detergent and the little ferns his wife keeps alive no matter what. The sobbing sounded out of place there. He scrubbed a hand over his scalp and said, "You know this is asking for you to keep going, right?" "What do I do with help?" I said. "Pretend I didn't hear it." He blew out air. "Maybe it's asking for something you can't give. Maybe playing it in your kitchen is the wrong kind of help." I slept on his couch and dreamed I was standing under the angel with my hands up like I was offering to catch a kid being lowered out of a window. And every time I reached, the kid became a shadow smaller than my hands could hold. When I woke, I had grit in my palms. Sand. Where from, I don't know. I don't. I shook it into the trash and didn't think about the way it felt like it had been in my hands all night. Here's the part where I tell you I did research and found a story that explains it. I looked at plaques and rows and little marble lambs, on headstones wearing green from years of damp. I walked during daylight and read names until the letters swam. I brought a small stuffed bear from a thrift store and set it near the angel. I told myself I could do at least that. I went to the office and saw Rupert talking to the woman in the blue jacket. He looked at the bear in my hand and nodded once. On my way back to the car, he said, "If you take something, you bring something. If you bring something, you leave it." It sounded like a rule invented after someone broke it. I didn't take anything. Not then. That came later, in a way I didn't recognize as taking until it was done. I saw a coin on a low stone near the angel. It was tarnished but not stuck, and without thinking I picked it up between 2 fingers to see the year. The face was smoothed almost to nothing. You could tell it had been held and rubbed by a lot of hands the way worry smooths. Maybe I meant to put it back. I can't swear. Someone behind me laughed. The normal kind of person laugh at something on a phone. And it startled me enough I put the coin in my pocket automatically so I could turn. There was a couple near the path, umbrella, matching rain boots, smiling at some private thing. By the time I turned back, my hand had already decided where the coin belonged. That night, in the dish by my front door, the coin sat like a small, wrong answer. The crying came back at 2 in the morning. There was no rain. The night was dry and hot, and the air conditioner coughed in the hall like a smoker trying to discreetly clear a throat. The sound rose in the kitchen, small, patient, like it knew how to find me. I stood in the doorway and listened. The coin in the dish caught a streetlight and turned it dull. I went and got the dish and dumped it into my palm and winnowed the coins until the smooth one lay in my hand, nameless as a face rubbed off by prayer. I put it back in the dish and the crying got softer, like listening through a wall. I took it out and the sound was right there again, like a kid on the other side of a bathroom door trying to make himself heard through steam. I am not proud of how long it took me to connect those dots. Pride had little to do with it. It was like trying to remember the name of a street you've driven every day for 10 years. It was there and not there. Once it clicked, it was obvious. I put on a t-shirt and jeans and shoved the coin into my pocket and drove back to Elmwood at 3 in the morning. The gate is closed at night. I know that now. I probably knew before, but my head made a space where the road would be because it needed me to get there. I parked by the chain and the sign that says closed and climbed the fence in the corner, where it dips a little lower. I did it quickly and quietly. Every inch of me said, "This is dumb." Every inch of me said, "Do it anyway." The path under the big trees was dark, and then less dark when my eyes adjusted. The angel stood at the same angle, a gray shape against a grayer sky. I didn't need my phone light. I knew where to go. The crying met me halfway, and stopped when I stopped. I took the coin from my pocket and set it on the base, and for a second I could swear the angel's finger touched it, light as a moth. The air changed like a room when someone leaves. I huffed out a breath and backed up and turned, and that's when everything went loud. A siren. A flash. Not police. Water. The sky ripped like someone had unzipped it and dumped the river down. The first blast hit me full in the face and drowned every other sound. I staggered and did that stupid half-run you do when your shoes are bad, and you know you're going to slip. I made it to the fence and went over a little worse than before. When I hit the ground on the outside, a car rolled up, blue lights soft, not the kind pulled all the way on. A security car, not the city. The woman from the porch leaned out. The brim of her rain jacket hood channeled water into a small waterfall off one corner. "You know what closed means," she said, not unkind. "Yes, ma'am," I said. I put a thing back. She sighed like she'd been waiting all night for those words. People take and then the place follows them home. They think that's punishment. It isn't. It's just what happens when you carry a door with you. She tipped her head toward the angel. "You hear it?" "I did," I said. The rain made my voice a mouthful. "Drive safe," she said. "Don't come back tonight." I nodded like I could nod myself into being better. I drove home at 20, and the coin stayed where I left it, and the crying did not follow. Not that night. The next week, the kitchen light worked again after I replaced the bulb, and I pretended that meant something beyond the bulb. I played the recording one more time and deleted it because I did not want that kind of door in my phone where my bank app and my sister's texts live. I thought that was the end of it and felt a little proud of having done what felt like the right thing. 2 weeks later, on a day so bright it made squinting a full-time job, I went by the cemetery at noon and set the thrift store bear on the base of the angel's pedestal. I didn't tell anyone. It felt like a secret handshake. On the way back to the car, a guy with a camera around his neck nodded to me and said, "You ever notice how the statues look different in pictures?" I told him I didn't take pictures. He laughed and said, "Good. They never look at the lens when you want them to." When I got home, my front door wouldn't open at first, even though the lock turned. It felt like someone was leaning against it on the other side. Not strong, just stubborn. I pushed and it gave, and the smell that came out was whetstone and old flowers. It faded in seconds. It could have been my shoes. Since then, when it rains, I turn the radio down because I want to hear. I don't know why. Maybe I think if I can put an edge to the crying, I'll be ready for it. It hasn't come back like that night. I get a soft version sometimes, the way you hear street noise in a dream and make it part of the plot. When I drive through Elmwood in daylight, I keep my eyes on the lane, but I always see the angel out of the corner of my sight, finger to lips, patiently holding her place. A month after I put the coin back, I found a wet ring on my kitchen table, like a glass had been set there, except I hadn't had a glass out, and in the middle of the ring was the outline of a small handprint, not detailed, just the suggestion of 5 small pads. I wiped it with my sleeve and it smeared into a cross, 2 strokes, a sign you make when you don't have paper. You want a better ending. I get it. You want me to tell you I found a grave with a name that matched a headline from 1892, or that the groundskeeper told me a story that explains why the crying comes in storms, or that I saved someone. I don't have that. I have what happened. I have the way the voice recorder caught help like a bug in amber and how wrong that felt when it played in a kitchen full of ordinary noise. I have a coin I stopped carrying and a bear that stayed a week and then was gone the next time I looked, probably picked up by someone who needed it more than a stone did. I have a rule now where I don't take things that don't belong to me, even if they look like trash. I have an angel who, if I am honest, looked at me once. Last week, a summer storm parked over the river and moved across the city like it had a slow appointment to keep. The sky did the dishwater thing. The trees went black at the edges. I took a different road home because I'm not a total fool. At the last minute, the light at Linden turned red, and the side street I picked spilled me into Elmwood anyway. I could have turned around. I could have backed up. I kept going. The rain started as a low drum on the hood and opened to full hands. Between the wipers, I saw the angel waiting. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I rolled the window down a crack just enough to hear if the world had something to say. For a few seconds, between the breath of the wind and the slap of water and the hum of my tires on old road, I heard it. A small voice, steady, not angry. A sob shaping itself into a word. It wasn't help this time. I won't tell you the word because I am not sure I want to carry it for anyone else, but it was soft and it was a request, and it was the kind of word you answer by saying, "I hear you," even if you can't do more than that. I put my hand on the wheel and said out loud, "I hear you." It looked crazy. I looked crazy. It felt like not nothing. When I passed the office, the woman in the blue jacket stood under the porch, rain stepping down all around her, and she lifted a hand, a greeting, a warning. Both. I lifted mine back. I drove on. The road curved. The stone rows fell behind. The city took me up and shook me a little and then let me keep going. The angel stayed where she was, fingered her lips, watching the lanes. The sky kept its appointment and emptied. I got home and the kitchen light didn't flicker when I turned it on. The dish by the door was empty. I slept without the TV. Around 3, I woke and lay there listening to the storm rolling away toward other people's houses. And for a long minute, the apartment was so quiet, I could hear the fridge click and the ceiling tick where it settles. And in that quiet, I realized I was waiting for crying and not afraid of it. I don't know if that's good. I don't know if anything I did changed anything but me. If you cut through Elmwood on a night like that, don't make a show of it. Keep your lights low. Keep your mouth shut. If you hear a child crying and your body does that flinch, let it pass through you. If you feel plenty brave, pull into the wide spot before the curve and sit with your hazards, making small promises. If a drop lands on your hand and it feels too warm to be from the sky, don't pretend you didn't feel it. If you picked anything up without thinking, put it back. If you brought a thing to leave, leave it. Don't take pictures. Don't ask for proof. You're already in the proof. And if the angel tilts her head a fraction in the corner of your eye, don't look straight at her. You can if you want, but I don't recommend it. You won't get an answer that makes sense. You'll get a question the size of a coin, worn smooth by 100 fingers, and you'll carry it around like a door in your pocket until you remember where it belongs.